have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
Hello, and welcome to the wonderful and strange Twin Peaks Logcast. I'm Kalil, and with me today is the false arm to my demonic presence.
I am the Unplugged Professor.
Welcome to our dual episode, our twin episode of Dumbland and Rabbits, two David Lynch miniseries from the year 2002.
I'm the Unplugged Professor.
We are the two podcasts here today on the Twin Peaks Wonderful Strange Logcast. I am excited. Are you excited, Professor?
I'm the Unplugged Professor.
And we're ready to talk about things. Dumbland and Rabbits. Content warnings. I guess split pretty evenly between the two of them. Well, probably more on the Dumbland side, I suppose. Between these two works, there is some really gross, crude humor. In one of them more than the other. Cartoon violence. In one of them more than the other. Existential dread. In both of them. In different ways. Depersonalization. And then we are likely to veer into conversations down the road that could lead into more serious topics of abuse and adultery. So, heads up on those things. Spoilers in the way for Dumbland, Rabbits, anything David Lynch has made before this, including Twin Peaks material, potentially. And then odds are we are going to spoil elements of What Did Jack Do? Even though that came out later, it sounds like that might be a little relevant in some ways. I might tangentially mention the atmosphere of Fire Posar, and that's about it. All those things, that's about it.
I'm the Unplugged Professor.
Trivia sources. Does That Hurt You? A short film on the making of Dumbland.
That's an apt frickin' title now, isn't it?
I'm Kalil. IMDb, Wikipedia, The Inland Empire, TheCityOfAbsurdity.com, The Guardian, The Artifice, 25 Years Later, and Film and Philosophy's YouTube video essay, Let's Talk About David Lynch's Rabbits. This is my most research episode so far in our podcast.
And from what I understand, a significant portion of that, Kalil,
roughly 50%,
is towards Dumbland.
Yeah, it is.
Kalil, why did you make me watch Dumbland?
Well, I would argue that there is a direct relevance between Dumbland and Twin Peaks: The Return. And I would argue that in terms of David Lynch's filmography, it does add something to the conversation. I would hope that you took something away from this. You learned something different about David Lynch that you didn't know prior.
I did.
And I think that that's valuable.
I'm a little bit more afraid of The Return.
If you truly love someone, you don't just love their beautiful eyes or their smile. You love their earwax. You love their snot. You love the viscous elements of who they are. That's true love. And if you're to truly love David Lynch, you must love every single thing about him. You are not allowed to have any diverting opinions. It all must be a perfect 10 out of 10 for you. Otherwise, you're not a true fan.
I feel like I'm a Care Bears villain in that respect, because I guess I just don't know love and I have a contempt for love.
You know, the same could be said for the characters of Rabbits. I say could be because we don't know. It's a big, Home Improvement sound effect.
Yeah, it's like suddenly that would make then the stock effect of like, applause,
So I know you want to jump right into Dumbland. I know you're really eager to talk about it, but I think we should talk about Rabbits first.
Thank you.
Yes. So, Rabbits, what were your general thoughts on R8 to the double B It's?
Generally, for one, I think that it is a nice overall, I would almost say, splash of horror twisted with a sense of playing with the psychology of sitcoms. As someone who grew up with sitcoms myself, every point where it seems that it leans into that little sitcom atmosphere, I feel a bit compelled by, say, for example, some of the audience reactions that are present throughout it. And that actually kind of surprised me and took me a little bit back. It was a full-on experience in which I was not expecting, if you will. And as I continued to dive deeper and deeper, if you will, I was able to come out with it thinking to myself, man, this is a lot like Twin Peaks, in the respect more so of a specific family.
So in terms of availability, both Dumbland and Rabbits are kind of weird and precarious. There are uploads of Rabbits on YouTube from David Lynch's official channel, There are also uploads by unofficial channels that have like compiled elements. It's also available on the lime green box set, which is currently not in print actively, but you can find it online for probably higher prices. So both are available weirdly in different ways. Dumbland is also kind of, I think, a little harder to find than Rabbids. So if you're able to watch Rabbids in some format, it doesn't have the highest resolution. It was definitely shot on like a lower grade digital camera. So even if it says like 1080p resolution, it definitely looks like something that's made in 2002. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think it adds to the atmosphere in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
The actual setup here is it's in one box set, right, with 3 cast members, and that's it. I want to point out that this is the triumphant moment of our hero, Scott Coffey, playing the role of Jack Rabbit. Scott Coffey! Yeah! Oh, yeah.
Are you going to be sad one day when we no longer talk about Scott Coffey?
We will always talk about Scott Coffey.
One day we will, at least die.
That
Kalil.
doesn't mean that's the end of talking about Scott Coffey.
Your corpse will just, make sounds from underneath the earth amongst its ashen remains, in which people will hear the howls of Scott Coffey.
Look, I all joking aside, I just think it's really cool that this guy who is playing these, minor roles in David Lynch's works, doing his own, weird film with Naomi Watts, just kind of on the side, he gets to be such a critical figure in Rabbids, arguably the main figure of this thing. Everything revolves around Jack's mysteries and secrets here. I'm glad he has a moment to shine, even if he's inside of a very warm, probably uncomfortable rabbit head. And suit.
Yes.
Mostly the head I'm thinking of.
Mostly the head.
His most famous David Lynch role is one in which you cannot see him. But I still am happy for good old Scott Coffey. So, my general thoughts, I like Rabbids. I like Rabbids a little more than Dumbland, although both of them I would say I'd enjoy. I would say that I'd give both of them your 3 out of 5, 6 out of 10. I enjoy them. I find them probably more artistically interesting than necessarily I'm going to go rewatch them and enjoy them. And for Rabbids, a lot of it comes down to atmosphere.
Yes.
More than it does story and characters. I'm really interested in the vibe and feeling it's going for that isn't quite like anything else I've necessarily experienced. Even within David Lynch's catalog, it just hits different.
It most certainly does hit, I would say, different and the same in different regards, if you will. I still think that there is an overall atmosphere that David Lynch has tapped into before with it, but I do think that the way that the story is being presented, I'm almost reminded of his just general short films of the past.
Yeah, and I'm generally reminded of Inland Empire, which is coming up real soon for us.
Yes.
So when I think Rabbids, I think Inland Empire and the way those are connected. Watching Rabbids on its own is different. I enjoy it.
I enjoy Rabbids.
The other voice actors and actors in the costumes other than Scott Coffey as Jack is Laura Elena Haring as Jane, although interestingly enough at one point it's Rebecca Del Rio actually in there during a singing moment, and then Naomi Watts playing Susie. So it's the 2 actors from Mulholland Drive
Yes.
inside of those rabbit suits. This was made freshly after / maybe during. I don't know the exact timeline, but I'm assuming Mulholland Drive had been either wrapped up or was about to be wrapped up, and then David Lynch worked with Scott Coffey and those 2 to make this sort of mini-series at that time.
Yes.
Lynch filmed Rabbids in a set built in the garden of his house in Hollywood Hills, because of course this is made in his garden.
Yes.
The filming took place at night in order to control the lighting better. Lynch says that filming Watts, Haring, and Coffey with the set lit up by enormous lights was, quote, a beautiful thing. Lynch's neighbors, however, did not necessarily feel the same way. They complained about the filming take place at night and up on the hill behind Lynch's home. Lynch, remarking on this neighbor complaint, says, he hates my guts. We built the set. It was a little amphitheater with 3 DV cameras, 3 monitors, and a microphone so I could talk to the actors. It was a slick setup. Real poor man's setup, but good. Then my neighbor complains to the city, and I had to get extra lawyers. But nothing worked. And then they said had to come down. They force you to do something traditional, like renting a studio or something. Look, the classic conflict between a man who just wants to make his movie outside of Hollywood, in Hollywood, and then another person who's living next door who doesn't like bright lights and weird sets in the middle of night next door. Classic confrontation. You read about it all the time in the great works of literature, in all of the world's major sacred texts. From the Bible to the Quran to the Bhagavad Gita and so on and so forth. truly a tale as old as time, a song as old as rhyme. David Lynch and his neighbor.
Yeah, I'm sorry, David Lynch, but unfortunately, like, you signed up for this and not, like, the guy who's also trying to exist at the same time as you. Like,
yeah.
I understand where you're upset.
I just want to buck the system. Don't try to box me in. I'm David Lynch.
But this isn't just like this is in a respect a different system though, David Lynch. This is a different context.
I would need to like see how bad it actually is. I mean, if I was David Lynch's neighbor, I'd be more like, hey, cool, David Lynch is next door. I wouldn't be like mad about. He could probably do anything. He could probably have like buzzing saws like 24 hours a day, people screaming incoherently at hours of the night, and I'd be like, ha, David Lynch, cool.
Like this was still like this is in California, correct?
Yeah, over on Hollywood Hills.
Yeah, so in California, around Hollywood Hills, probably a heavily expensive place to live.
Yeah.
Probably have to get it up in the morning.
Yeah.
To try to deal with life.
Uh-huh.
And at 3 a.m, boom, oh.
It's funny. Like, I do understand, yeah. David Lynch probably did not have necessarily a high regard for his neighbor's peace of mind in that moment. It is just a funny thought nonetheless to me, even if it wasn't for the neighbor.
I feel like there's just something that grows inside of me as I continue to grow and grow and grow, where I see scenarios like this, where I see scenarios and say, for example, like when I'm watching a kid's film with some of my overall like younger nieces and nephews, and I think to myself, like, these poor individuals that are set up as antagonists, which they just want some peace out of the dread of the day.
Also, speaking of trying to find peace, Haring, I don't know if it's Herring or Haring, I apologize, but the actor who is playing Jane in this, she is claustrophobic and kind of has talked a bit about the experience of being inside this rabbit suit, because the actors were inside the suit as well as doing the voiceovers later, so it was kind of both of those. I'm assuming the voiceovers are done later and they don't have like a mic inside the head. I'm just, based on the audio quality, it doesn't sound muffled, so I'm going to assume.
No, I agree. As someone who has, unless like he had a really good setup, it's really hard.
Based on the visual quality of this and the DIY garden setup, I'm going to say probably not.
Yeah, no, those heads do not look acoustically sound.
No. The score was acoustically sound, though. It was composed by Angelo Badalamenti. I think that the sound is doing a lot of heavy lifting in Rabbids in a good way. I think that it does so much for the atmosphere, because there are moments in Rabbids where like no one's doing anything for like minutes on end. Like, I remember the first episode opens with like multiple minutes, probably only like 2 or 3, but you feel it, where just everyone's just kind of standing. Like, Jane and Susie are just mostly in one place, one on the couch, one ironing, and you just are left with the visual and the auditory experience.
Honestly, with the auditory experience, as someone, maybe it's a bit of a bias that I have because of how much I've been streaming like horror games lately. But it's just a very much a horror-like, it's a looming atmosphere. It's a dark atmosphere that is only broken up from time to time from cheers and audience laps, if you will, with the overall background. Again, leaning into that.
It's just like working
atmosphere.
retail.
No.
Long, horrible experience.
There's no one who like comes by and just press those. And if so, it's not going to be a slow, like, I'm still going to keep doing what I'm doing. I can assure you, anyone who hits a laugh track when you're inside of a bad day in retail is just going to slowly look in your direction. And that look alone will murder.
The tagline for this that David Lynch came up with is, quote, "In a nameless city, deluged by continuous rain, 3 rabbits live with a fearful mystery." Would you say that tagline's apt?
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I think David Lynch has a knack for these like one-liner taglines. When we get to Inland Empire, it's going to be a woman in trouble. And it's just like, yep, that's what happens in Inland Empire. I don't disagree with you, David. I don't disagree with you. And the one from Mulholland Drive I remember being really good too. So he's kind of killing it with these.
Maybe just like whenever like a DVD is present, just only have like David Lynch's lines in that, and everything else is just empty space on the back of the DVD cover. It won't be wrong. It'll be quick to the point in that respect. But at the same time, I think there's almost a humor in that and now how quick it can be described.
I also noticed when I was doing the research, I think it was on LynchNet, that David Lynch had a quote regarding rabbits that almost sounds like it could have been at points about Dumbland, but he said of the show Rabbits, "It's the most absurd, surreal, beautiful, and again, kind of stupid show." I think it's interesting to me that he does call it stupid. I guess I don't normally think of his rabbits as stupid. I do think if someone watches Rabbits and they come across saying this is pretentious, that this is just like really full of itself and stupid and pointless, I think that's a respectable takeaway, to be honest. I think that this is one of those works that is so esoterically in its own like world that I don't think it's made to be a crowd pleaser by any means. If you like watch Rabbits and you're like, wow, I just wasted 40 minutes, there's nothing happening. Valid. That's completely fair. I think this is one of the things someone could hate by David Lynch I'd be the most completely understanding about. I could see this being awful for someone. But I don't necessarily think of it as stupid myself. I think it's interesting that David Lynch saw it as stupid. Do you consider Rabbits to be a stupid show?
I think all the things that you just described right there, as well as like all the words that you put into like how you feel about David Lynch reciting this could also fit if this were describing Dumbland, if you will.
Especially beautiful. Especially beautiful. Rabbits is listed oftentimes as a horror web series, like on Wikipedia, but David Lynch does not call it that. He just says it's a sitcom, and he just leaves it at that. It's a sitcom.
A+, David Lynch.
But you would agree on the horror vibes.
I would absolutely agree on the horror vibes. I think that genuinely it is an atmosphere that I can overall get behind and kind of stay concentrated with, especially thanks to Angelo Badalamenti's score. It also helps that if we are to go by the sitcom vibes, adding an eeriness to being only stuck on one camera, no editing, no zooms or anything like that, just stuck on that one studio spot where it does feel like generally a studio, it's very effective.
While I was researching, I came across an article by Matt Colt for the website 25 Years Later entitled Rabbits Mainlining Lynch Straight No Chaser. And in this article, among other things, he compares Rabbits to Japanese traditional form of theater known as No, N-O-H, at least in terms of romanizing it. And No theater is minimalist by nature, very slow-paced, staged so that small actions take on great significance. The performers wear masks, thick costumes that de-emphasize the actor's presence. Little effort is made to create any sort of illusion that this isn't fictional, that this isn't theater. It's very much like, nope, don't even try to suspend your disbelief. We are very clear that this is a form of theater. It oftentimes does not necessarily make the audience comfortable, from what I can tell. And the audience gets that sense that art is being created before their eyes. Apparently, another concept very important to No theater, as well as a lot of other traditional Japanese art, is what's called ma, the profound application of space or stillness, like as in a painting or an image with a lot of emptiness on the canvas.
Okay.
So when you kind of hear these words, do you find Rabbits fits the bill for those sort of descriptors?
I think that, no, genuinely it does fit the overall bill. I don't know necessarily if I'd describe it that way outright, but I can most certainly see and feel that those overall viewings are most certainly valid when it comes down to Rabbits as an experience. Though I'm kind of curious on, say, for example, how Rabbits is being seen directly. Say, for example, when I'm thinking overall play performance, I'm not seeing it in as many parts as Rabbits is. I'm kind of curious on the overall, like, how this was given to an audience, if you will. Like, was it just released directly on, like, a DVD?
I'm glad you asked. Originally, this used to be on David Lynch's website. More recently, it was uploaded to popular online video platforms. But originally, it was a subscription service along with Dumbland, where basically, from what I understand, you would pay a fee subscription-wise to receive Rabbits and Dumbland straight from David Lynch's website, which is now defunct.
Now,
and a lot of those things have been re-uploaded.
All at once, or just one piece at a time?
I believe it was piece at a time.
Piece at a time?
Could be wrong on that one.
And was it, say, for example, in this service, like, was it just, like, emailed directly? Was it something like a David Lynch-style Netflix in which, like, there were other series, other, like, short films and other pieces? Or was it just mainly these
I would
sort of,
assume it was other things as well, because this was at a time before these short films of David Lynch had been fully released, I don't think, like as one collectible DVD.
All right.
So I think it was at the time. Obviously, I was not a conscious person on David Lynch's website at that moment.
Yes.
And there's only so much I could, I guess, find from a cursory look. But it does sound like you had access to a few more things, and it wasn't fully, like, long-lived. It feels like a little more of an experiment you did for maybe a couple of years.
Were you able to see what was the cost for the subscription?
I did not find that in my research, no.
Very well.
I don't know if that information is still out there or not.
What do you think, like, in this hypothetical realm of hypothetical David Lynch content, and you could hypothetically get access to these, how much would you pay forward for, say, for example, these films to check them out for the subscription. These are the things like the headline, like in front of Netflix, if you like Squid Game or something like that. You're like, oh, I want to check that out. And you're willing to subscribe to check out these series.
Well, this was such a different era.
It was a different era, but...
This was way before you had this. So it was kind of a novelty at the time.
It was.
And if you were really into David Lynch and there was no other way to watch these, I feel like you could have asked for a pretty high price point.
Could have asked for a pretty high price point. What would you have paid, do you feel, in this sort of like day and age if you really...
Well, I would have been probably like $6. So as a 6-year-old, I might have paid some pocket rents.
How much lemonade are you selling?
I really don't have a dollar value amount. I guess I feel nowadays this format would be unsustainable just because there's not enough output to justify much of a cost.
Valid.
It reminds me of people who do like Patreon, who might do like a dollar amount per video rather than per month. Because with how much there is here, maybe you're paying like $1 or $2 per video for the duration of how many videos are made. And I know you would definitely pay that amount for Dumbland, so... Because Dumbland's like 8 parts, right? So you'd pay $8 for Dumbland?
I would pay money to not watch Dumbland.
You'd pay $8 to actively block Dumbland from your computer.
Yes.
So I don't know. I'll say $1 or $2 per video.
Okay.
What about you?
As far as these items go, I'm more thankful of the DVD format at this point. I don't think it would be something that would sell me directly, but if it was something which, like, I could be convinced on... like subscribe wise, probably like a little average of like a Patreon donation, like around $5 a month for like overall content. I do understand and I do agree that would be more expensive at the time, especially for like the accessibilities, and it's likely my own like sensibilities and experience through other values now that it might be skewed, but genuinely when it comes down to it, like let's say Dumbland, it was like what, 8 episodes?
I think so, yeah.
8 episodes over the course of, let's say, a new one each time. I believe that you were watching like a documentary, if you will, on Dumbland, and it's like he said, like once every month, once every couple of months, if you will. Let's say like he's getting these sort of like sent out, and each time that's come up to about a $40 value over that course of time if he's releasing about once each month. So I think that at that point, up to that $40 value. For both these series would be, I'd say at the very least sensible in my brain at the moment.
Okay, fair enough. If you are checking these out on the Lime Green set, by the way, there are some weird things going on with rabbits on the release. So it's on the 10th disc of the Lime Green box set listed as Mystery DVD. I'm not going to go through all of this, but basically you're looking at like episode 1 contains episodes 1, 2, and 4, and then like episode 3 isn't on the disc because that was the one that had Rebecca Del Rio, and it's a weird thing. There's like episodes combined, there's episodes missing. So if you are checking that out, I would look into, what's on the disc and what's not, and maybe supplement as necessary.
Okay.
There was a situation that happened that I've seen a few places like mentioned, because it's kind of one of those like, okay. I haven't read the direct sourcing of it, but I've seen it around, is that rabbits was used as a stimulus in a psychological experiment at one point. On the effects of acetaminophen on existential crises. The research in a paper entitled The Common Pain of Surrealism and Death suggested that acetaminophen acted as a suppressant to the compensatory desire to affirm systems of meaning that viewing surrealism has been shown to produce. So they tested by showing people rabbits and seeing how this would work with them. Yeah.
Science can be horrifying sometimes.
Well, I mean, it's like they showed him Dumbland, at least.
No, I know that they didn't show him Dumbland.
that would be a form of cruelty, dismal punishment, according to you.
Yeah, no, maybe a mercy if you don't have to think too much through Dumbland.
Do you think that rabbits is something for yourself or for people you know? Do you think it would cause them stress, or, as they put it here, they desire to affirm systems of meaning?
The only people I know who would probably check this out would be you. Genuinely, as far as items go, I enjoy these pieces of media. I enjoy them, and I enjoy them with you. But I will fully admit, as far as family and friends go, they have different tastes, and that's completely fair. If, say, for example, I had cloned you multiple times, if you will,
terrible mistake.
No, I think that, in truth, this is something that either A, I would have as a passive sort of thing to overall watch and say, you know what, this is actually kind of interesting. Let's go and pop this in. Or B, use it in the respects of leaning into the David Lynch catalog. Anyone who's like a fan of David Lynch or kind of like sees like patterns through David Lynch, I do think that this is a viewing that can do something for someone who is like wanting to kind of feel out David Lynch's work. I do think that there was a good selection in that.
So you mentioned that like I'm the kind of person that would like this.
Yeah.
And you don't really know many of the people who would outside of cloning me.
Yeah.
Going back to just general thoughts on it and also going back to the subscription idea, if this was not David Lynch, just some random creator releasing this now on like an old camera to make it look almost analog style.
Yeah.
And you found this work, would you follow them? Would you subscribe to them? Would you support them on their Patreon or other fund accounts?
As someone who enjoys that, especially like you said, analog camera, that's got to overall me somewhat more excited because I think that
like if this was being made now,
if it's made now,
it looks 20 years old.
It's 20 years. Yeah, it looks 20 years old. If you lower the budget and put it on analog, I mean, analog horror is coming up in rise within the past couple of years. I think that genuinely probably be more popular, and I could probably get more people to check it out. I think that its production value, though lower than average from what we've recently reviewed from David Lynch, is something that is nice, something appealing towards my eyes, but I think would lessen the appeal for like a general audience when it comes down to, say, for example, trying to branch this out beyond. I think that when you attach a name such as David Lynch, that is when you start thinking about David Lynch quality, if you will. David Lynch is still a well-known director.
Yeah.
David Lynch has worked on these past things. If it came out of the blue from a director that was unknown, put it out on towards these bits of analog, I can see a cult following along with Rabbids.
So you think almost David Lynch's name acts against this work?
Yes.
In the sense that people are going to dismiss this in the grander scope of his filmography?
In the respects of those who are not outright looking for David Lynch works, yes. Those who, again, I think that this connects a bit more into either David Lynch's style or Twin Peaks. Those who enjoy Twin Peaks or the items that go into the themes of David Lynch through Twin Peaks, I think that this can appeal to. But if I want a broader appeal, I do think, yes, the name could be a hindrance.
So again, my question was, do you think you would support this creator and follow their work?
If it was analog and it wasn't David Lynch behind it, yeah.
So the current way it's visualized now, you
Yes.
would not support it. It has to have
Current
like
way visualized now from a random director depends on the mood in the day.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I feel like a main difference between this and analog horror, aside from, it doesn't have the VHS aesthetic, is that usually with these sort of horror series, it's more straightforward scary. Like straightforward, like there's a horrifying image, or the idea that there's going to be a narrative, there's going to be some kind of story or riddle or mystery. This defies that. This does not arguably have much of a story at all, and it doesn't really have like it's scary. It's got like some unsettling imagery, maybe an unsettling sound here and there, but a lot of its horror is very slow creeping, and it's very indirect.
As somewhat of an argument, like, yes, there are many pieces that do have that sun pieces, and as one that has, I would say for the majority, with maybe small snippets, if you will, Marble Hornets is probably one in which like slowly creeps over time that uses analog horror, but for the most part plays off of the atmosphere. And if we are to just go with the slow looming and it's not like a creeping monster that's in the background, I'd put up the idea towards things like Omega Mart, which is also uses techniques similar to analog and even has a nice display over in Vegas, if you will, slowly uncovering the mystery, but at the same time the darker elements could be dug through as you continue to analyze what seems at first to be absurdity. So, and I do think that can come out of Rabbids as well, or something can be read from it in that appeal from Rabbids. That some of the overall lines being delivered in this sort of like strange way in what seems like peace dialogue could be as first seen as absurdity until people try to scratch beyond the surface and come to the potentially their own conclusions or idea of what the narrative is. I don't know if there's a full narrative beyond it. I believe there is, but I can also see arguments against it as well.
Yeah, there's a video essay that was done by a creator I really admire his work by the names of Macrophones, and he made a video on the theater of the absurd within the context of a lot of times video games, especially indie video games. And so not to completely miss the point of what he was saying in that particular 3-hour video, but I do get sense in which you could argue Rabbids is theater of the absurd. It is that sort of very Waiting for Godot style classical absurdism, it almost feels like. And we were talking earlier about the idea of being compared to Japanese theater. not Dumbland, Dumbland's not a play. If Rabbits was a play on a stage and you could go and be in the audience of it and like watch the 40-minute like one act of Rabbits with the monologues happening in between the scenes, all the characters, how do you think it would feel as a play and you're in the audience watching it versus watching it on like YouTube or on a DVD? What do you think would change or stay the same if it was actually a play the way that like Industrial Symphony was on a stage?
I would say that as far as it goes and just sort of like watching these looming bits, I don't know how they add the effects, if you will. And maybe like the audience sounds, or if you will, the lights that go on might add more of an appeal. I think that you would need the audience engagement to actively, like, it shows like the sign for like applause, if you will, so that the audience goes through. Because without that, and you're set at that lower angle, it's very slow paced to a point that I can almost see myself maybe getting bored.
I think there's something to be said for the camera angle being constant here. You can't look away or look around or get a different viewpoint. You are stuck on this one fixed angle. And you mentioned the idea of the applause. The fact that there is no like audience clearly there, it's just this empty canned laughter, empty canned applause, I think does something for it. Whereas if you were in a room full of people clapping, that would change the mood. I'm not saying it would ruin it, but it would definitely change it.
It would change or shift the mood, but I think maybe perhaps it could also, to some potentially, enhance it. Because just imagine, like, say for example, like they say, okay, now here's how this goes, this is how the performance goes. When that light goes on, we want you to applause. And I can just imagine just like either the absolute confusion, if you will, people have when it just like flashes on after a line is said along lines of like, I have a secret that I can't tell. Bing! Yay!
So I think as a communal experience, it'd be something really interesting to feel being in that room, but it definitely wouldn't be as cold and distant.
It might not be as cold as distant at first. I think that either A, you would have to either play it off completely, in which like it is up to the audience, or B, hide some people inside there that are in on like what's going on and just have them sort of like push the audience mood, like about 3, 4, maybe 5 guys inside of a crowd of like 30. And when that does come on, they're like straight up getting into it as if like nothing else is happening, if you will. And then there's just like people are just trying to follow along with it. Maybe.
Well, it's also the idea, what if it was recorded in the format we have now and then they went with a live version, so people who go to the theater or go to experience this as the audience know what Rabbits is, so they can be in on it now. I don't know. It's an interesting idea. I'm glad we went down in that little tangent.
Went down the rabbit hole.
Went down the rabbit hole. So we had to make that joke once at least. Side note, by the way, there was an abandoned Lynch project called Dream of Bovine, which roughly the premise was going to be the opposite of Rabbits, where it's 3 men who were formerly cows, live in Van Nuys, and continue to act like cows. So that's an abandoned project that some have argued is like the opposite of Rabbits, or comparable.
So it's just cows.
Yeah. They're people, but they used to be cows, and now they act like cows still.
It's just cows.
Yeah. David Lynch had cows on the brain a little bit. There's some stuff when he was trying to promote Laura Dern with nominations for awards. He brought like cows around, and David Lynch is a thing with cows. Not in a bad way, you know, just in a way.
In a way.
I'm not gonna say it's good.
Quantifiably.
I'm gonna say it's a way. So yeah, we both agree. I think that the actual atmosphere and feeling and visual auditory stimuli of Rabbits is more interesting to us than necessarily the characters and plot. Would you like? If we were to quantify it, like this is the main draw?
If we were to quantify it in its overall general appeal, in its own absence from anything else, yes.
What do you think of the pacing?
Pacing? Again, slow. But I think that overall, from the media that we have, from the angle that we have, from everything that we currently have with it, I think that's still a strength with it. I think that the strongest strength is one go. Now, forgive me, I decided to partake on an edit, if you will, that pieces everything together.
Right.
Do you get the opening credits for each episode?
Yes.
Okay.
That is one thing that's different.
Yeah, that's one thing that would be very different. I think that the draw and the lull going through the whole entire experience was very much appealing to me. Yeah. Inside of pieces, however.
And if it was released like weekly or monthly, like as a subscription thing,
Yeah.
then you wouldn't have that element.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting. Like imagining if you were on the subscription for this and you got the first episode and you just get like that 3 or 4 minute thing and then you're like waiting eagerly for the next one and then you get the monologue. You know, how different that would feel versus us being able to watch it in one go.
It's like wanting to like look straight into a dread microwave at that point. Just like
what?
like the thing is that you go straight towards the overall experience. Like you see the first episode, then
Yep.
the next subscription goes in. It's like, oh yay, and then you look at it, and just like a microwave, it's slowly moving and it's slowly whirring and it's going ooh, and you're just like watching and waiting. I don't see anyone like getting like overtly excited. It's like, yeah, it's like, oh, it's like, ah. I think again, it's a microwave watching experience if it's put into pieces.
What'd you think of the performances from the 3 actors?
Performances overall, I can mostly assert their overall vocal performances because the physical performance is very stiff.
Yeah.
I think that again, it
By
appeals
design.
for the tone and by the design, as well as probably also the limitation. I don't think that there's much really large movement you can do with those giant rabbit heads and so on. So it's appealing for what media it has, but if I had to like talk about standout areas, most certainly it is the speaking roles, especially when it comes towards the overall vocal singing performance from one of the asides that occurs.
Fair enough. As far as trying to break down meaning in rabbits, I think the main thing one would expect an episode in a podcast ostensibly about rabbits to try to do. We both approach this kind of in our own different ways.
Yep.
So I opted to try at first, because I've seen this before years ago. I wanted to type up every line of dialogue and identify questions, try to link questions to answers that are given, and try to see if you can piece this together. Because the common reading, or at least one of the common readings I was finding online, is people thinking this maybe would have been a complete script, and then it got scrambled. It got like rearranged. And I wanted to test like, okay, well, does it line up that way if you tried it? And I could be mistaken. I could just be bad at puzzles. But my current like working thesis would be that no, I don't think it does work that way. I don't think it does because there were so many moments that I couldn't find something else to connect it to. It just didn't line up fully. And there's also an element in which a character might ask a question, and the closest thing I can find to an answer to that question is said by the same character. So I think there's a bit more going on here than just David Lynch wrote a script, cut it apart, scrambled it on the table, and then, put that in there as the final thing out of order. Because you have a character asking, like, what time is it? And the closest person who answers is themselves. Or who answered the phone? And then the person who answers the phone says the answer to that. So there is an element here where it feels like David Lynch is screwing around with the format enough that it might feel like it's just out of order. I think it's more messed up than just that. I don't think there is a way to fix Humpty Dumpty in this situation.
No, I do agree. There is use of just similar repetitions inside of the aside, which I think are very notable inside of the piece, but for the most part, it seems like it's very emotionally driven. The use of repetition, the use of overall just themes from each individual character are things to keep an eye on, but none of the dialogue is going to fully connect towards their overall experience, if you will. I think for the most part, it's just trying to evoke a mood with each of the characters and what they are towards one another more than it is going to be a full cohesive sort of like narrative.
So as we're going on and talking, I want to preface, at least for myself, and you can agree or disagree with this.
Very well.
I think that, if someone wants to approach David Lynch's work in whatever way that makes them comfortable and happy, that's valid by those metrics. Like, I think that his work is oftentimes the kind of thing where you can go and just enjoy it without thinking about it and just experience it from the visual and auditory stimuli and just have an experience. Don't even try to understand it. I think that's valid. If you want to spend hours trying to piece it together in way more depth and you want to really try to find an answer and make this work, I think that's a valid pursuit if that fulfills you. I'm going to posit that, but then I'm also going to posit for myself personally. When I'm like trying to re-scramble rabbits, I do feel like I am quote unquote missing the point, because I don't really think, again, death of the author and all aside, I don't really think David Lynch makes art for us to go and try to piece it together that way. I don't think it's ever that literal. So I have a hesitance to like really promote the idea of I'm going to go meticulously try to rearrange the pieces. I think he presented it the way he wanted us to perceive it.
I think that he presented it the way he wanted to.
Like, this
have
is
it
Rabbit's done
perceived
already.
for himself more than anything. I
Yes.
genuinely, like, from
He
what
makes
I
art for
understand,
himself.
Yeah, I think he makes it for himself more than he does it with others.
And even more than for himself, he makes it for the idea purely.
Yeah.
The idea that this is what came to my mind, this is what I'm going to try to make happen. So I think
seems like
that
less
this
of a
is
game with the-
Rabbits.
yeah, from the way that he speaks to his overall actors and just
Yeah.
like the way that he sort of like addresses.
I don't think it's a
mysteries,
trick. I don't think it's a game. I don't think it's a puzzle.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, he just likes playing with overall themes, ideas, and mysteries, if you will, because the existence of them is appealing.
I'd also point to how this work seems to resist trying to analyze it that way, because you have both Jane and Susie. Not only do they sound a lot alike when you're just hearing voices that you don't have any mouth moving, you don't have any context. Sometimes a character will turn ahead and talk. You can probably identify that as the speaker, but unless you're really good about telling these two voices apart,
Yeah.
they start to blend together a lot. And furthermore, there are lines where I had to like keep rewinding it just to understand what was being said without subtitles. And you have the similar outfits of Jane and Susie, both wearing pink, just slightly different shades.
Yes.
It feels like it's deliberately very muddled. So even if you are very meticulous in trying to piece together, you have to be dead certain you heard their words right. You could tell who was talking. And then this is working off the belief that it even like makes sense that all of Jane's dialogue is for Jane, and there aren't Susie lines slipped into Jane's dialogue, which I kind of am thinking right now. Yeah. What was your methodology like when you were trying to piece this together for the pod?
Well, I was trying to piece this together. In fact, like, I was mostly looking into the way each of the characters behaved, how they overall dressed, how they overall appeared, and mostly, like, a lot of the aside influenced what my interpretation of Rabbits became, if you will. And from that overall idea, I continued to sort of like look through the items and kind of like think to myself, how well does this overall stand up? How overall does this feel? Kalil, did you want me to go into that deeply at the moment?
By all means, whatever you feeling, man.
So, again, David Lynch seems to like follow in certain patterns with himself,
Right.
not only inside of themes, but I think that there's also story beats that he follows as well. As far as I'm concerned, whether it is something that you could put potentially one-to-one if you like take enough time with the overall pieces and see what you can come out with it, or if it is just a story told in a parallel fashion, this seems like the Palmer family. Like genuinely, this seems like the Palmer family. We have currently available Jack, who is the overall male figure inside the family, who seems to come in and out of the overall household, who seems to be holding secrets from the overall family, but for the most part is someone who is potentially overall just trying to keep things at bay the best that he can. And there's certain dialogue that I'll get into in just a moment. There's also one character who seems to be the potential motherly figure who sits on the overall chair and looks a bit more distant. Mind you, Sarah Palmer throughout the series can be seen as someone who is consistently drugged, if you will, someone who is consistently held aside, someone who is very much caught in inaction. And then we have someone who is presented with an open robe for a majority of the overall presentation that seems to be doing more activities in the overall background, who seems to be involved with red light, who seems to be involved in the mystic ends, and even on the shadows end has two shadows that are separate from her. This one could be Laura and in some extensions Maddie. The reason why I bring that up is because there's multiple scenes inside of this where this robed individual, open-robed individual, sits between these overall figures, and both of them lean down very close to her, very similar to when Maddie says she's going back to Missoula, Montana.
Right.
And there's a comfort, if you will, brought on by these very parental figures. Each of the asides, mind you, it's very interesting because the first one is sung out.
You mean the monologues?
The monologues, yes. One where each character is set aside, if you will, and they are presenting, if you will, pieces of information, words, if you will. And again, I think it evokes more of a mood than anything, but there's certain words that kind of like, woo-woo, set up red flags.
Woo-woo.
The first one is set up, from what I saw, by Jane, who, again, interpreting as Sarah Palmer. A lot of this still involves more so bits of information, such as smoke, oil, dark smiling teeth, butt in bed, torn in bed, crawling. But all the dialogue that she is presenting is singing. David Lynch, from the use of like people who are outright singing and presenting something in a singing fashion, seems to either A, try to press an overall mood, or B, is compelling an idea, narrative of foresight, if you will. There's the sycamore trees. There is the scene inside the roadhouse by, what was the...
Julie Cruz?
Julie Cruz, exactly. And they are what I would call very mystical beings, if you will. The closest thing to a seer and mystical being inside of, like, just the normal folks inside Twin Peaks, I would argue, is Sarah Palmer. She sees things. She overall has these visions and so on. So I think that having her being the mystical figure inside of this would be fitting for Jane or Sarah Palmer, being this sing-songy voice. The other characters hum, mind you. But I do think that that's just sort of like song being in the air, but both of them don't sing and belt out, similar to Jane in this case. Later on, we have Jack, who, again, I'm comparing to overall Leland. That puts forward that a dog crawls, and I'm thinking about what was like Black Dog Runs at Night that happens inside of...
Fire Walk With Me.
Fire Walk With Me, thank you. And having that come about and that song come through specifically when it comes towards a red room attendant, if you will, the little boy who's running inside of a circle around the point that Leland is being tempted. We have, something's wrong. And just like realization of like there's something of an issue coming up. Dark, smiling teeth, a swollen tongue. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, swollen tongue was something brought up inside of like the Diary of Laura Palmer, very much noting a tongue, if you will, in this capacity. Disease, broken window, vinyl knife, legs high. It seems like disaster is striking from this malicious force, if you will, that is bringing forward something darker. I'm thinking inside of like a Bob-like figure. There are like details such as like a green suited, like a man in a green coat. I think that I don't know what green may fully mean. Perhaps a sense of greed or like color theory.
We're just getting red and blue, David. David, we understand red and blue. Don't hit it with green now.
Don't add green to it.
Too many colors.
But still, the man in green is still strange. And what I was compelled by an idea was a malicious force. Susie, mind you, who I feel is the Laura figure, is presented with like combining both like the Jane and as well as the Jack dialogue and continues through, but very notably, for one, separates that like dark smiling teeth and just like makes a clear gap, which makes me wonder how it was written or if it's just more so notable on her end. But it's like still the dog crawls, something's wrong, dark smiling teeth, and I kind of compelled to look back on towards the lying in bed scene, if you will. But very, very, very notably, that was said between her as well as Jane, Susie and Jane, was mirror, smear of blood, eyes open darkness, like broken mirror, if you will. remind you of the picture or anything, followed by at the end. Like, these are not the asides anymore. All the characters come together. Two last lines are said, one by Jack and one by Susie. I went back and forth so much, which seemed to be a Susie line as she was actively moving, and we had basically nothing being done with Jane for quite some time. So I'm assuming it was Susie. Jack starts saying, it was the man in the green coat. Similar to the final scene inside of Fire Walk With Me. It was like, I thought it was me, but I didn't know, but you didn't know it was me. Almost as if like, pushing aside the blame on this green-coated man, followed with, I wonder who I will be, being the unsureness from Susie, if you will. Again, a very strange but still dark line, if we are to put it in the lens again, of the Palmer family, and specifically Laura. It's something in which I can see overall, again, there's plenty of loose pieces in which is scattered throughout this overall viewing, but I can't help but be compelled, especially with things like the Diary and Fire Walk With Me, to not like oversee these sort of like trends come through. And I again, it just might again be David Lynch using fire, if you will. Or anything like that.
And this is why I really like playing with something like rabbits. It may not be my favorite work of David Lynch, but because it's so abstract and so vague, it allows people to have drastically different interpretations. You know, you and I watched this separately, under very different circumstances, and I did not think of Twin Peaks at all when I watched this. It was not a point of reference for me, and obviously was very integral to your interpretation. And I think both of us have different valuable interpretations to offer here. And I'm sure, if you're listening and you've also watched Rabbits, you may find yourself somewhere between us. You may have something completely different as well. And it also probably is a very valid, interesting reading of it. Rabbits is an open canvas. It's an ink blot test.
It's very much open canvas. The thing in which I start leaning more and more into like David Lynch is just like uses themes and these could run in parallel is mainly because around the time that The Return was released,
right.
The short film?
Yeah.
Would I refer to
I'd call it a short film.
Yeah.
What Did Jack Do?
What Did Jack Do was released around the same time as The Return. And specifically, we never figure out what Jack does, but it's still like Jack did something.
Heavily
apparently.
implied.
Implied throughout Rabbits. And again, he reuses names. That's absolutely true. But still, it's a mystery core right here with this. And again, with how much I'm feeling out the Twin Peaks vibes and seeing like What Did Jack Do and that come out around the same time. What Did Jack Do being a very noir-esque story, mind you. Noir, yes. Where there is a man who seems to be having an affair with a chicken.
Well, it wasn't only a man, it was a monkey.
It was a monkey. A monkey having an affair with a chicken. And that leading up towards a tragic but still a chase with the overall sense of authority, if you will, during this. And also we can see a bit of like Leland pop into that. Not to mention, in Rabbits, there's literally a monkey that fades in using like Dumbland mouth techniques to overall speak. Again, common themes. How much do I overall use it as like David Lynch's techniques? How much do I overall use it to overall affirm my own personal position and make myself more comfortable in my personal
Why would you call the Jack's mouth moving like Dumbland?
Because it is a 2D style face.
Yeah.
2D style mouth, if you will, that is animated over a monkey's mouth. Like it is.
Was it?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah,
I guess I'm remembering it wrong then.
Yes, or at the very least, the overall like style that you sent me with the HD does show overall that there is.
You mean Rabbits?
Rabbits, yes, an HD render of the overall.
So you're saying the mouth moving in Rabbits, not the mouth moving in What Did Jack Do?
Yes, the mouth moving in Rabbits.
Okay, yeah, the Rabbits one is a 2D face. I thought you were talking about What Did Jack Do still.
Forgive me, yes. No, I'm comparing the monkeys between it. The monkey and What Did Jack Do just
versus
naturally pushes
the
them
red
out.
symbol creature in the sky in Rabbits.
Yes, mind you.
The ceiling, not
yes,
sky.
mind you, it was like a 15-year gap between these two things. So that's when they could like afford the monkey technology.
And that
to move
character
them out.
in Rabbits is referred to as Red Rabbit, not a monkey. So just that's what I was trying to clarify what you were talking about.
Yes, the red rabbit inside of Rabbits, who is a monkey that has the mouth move.
Is it a monkey?
It's a monkey, yes.
Okay.
I'm very certain I see the monkey because it seems like that style of monkey is used multiple times. Again, inside of What Did Jack Do, Fire Walk With Me, and Rabbits. It's weirdly how common like some elements are used between these three pieces of Lynch media.
And this is where I'm less likely to draw parallels between the works then, so much as to say that Lynch has certain ideas he likes to use.
Yes.
I'll notice a name pop up like in one of his paintings that he'll pop up later. You have Pierre and Sonny Jim. Well, Pierre is also the name of the magician's son in the Twin Peaks and Fire Walk With Me, who also is played by David Lynch's relative. Like, I don't think that means that the weird balloon guy Pierre is in some way linked to the magician Pierre. More just that he's got this pool of names. And regarding the name Jack, we have the monkey named Jack, but we've also got the idea of Jack Fisk, someone he knew and worked with very closely. Jack Nance, someone he knew and worked with closely.
Yes.
It's a very, like, monosyllabic American name.
It is, but let me ask you
David
this.
Lynch loved those.
He does love those. I don't know if he has like a personal use or like a philosophy on like what the name Jack means. But on the same course, how many times has he used the name Jack into some of like the films that we've seen thus far? Like actually use the name, because he has reused names before within his fictional works. Has Jack come up other than in these instances?
Yeah, without looking at all the IMDb pages, I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
I don't remember a main character being named it, but I also would not be surprised at all.
I'm not, like, as far as my memory serves me, I don't believe I can recall, think of, or arrange a Jack other than One-Eyed
But, like,
Jacks,
Dumbland has
which
an
is at a
Uncle
building.
Bob. Dumbland has an Uncle Bob. Do you, like, associate Bob then with that character?
I don't associate Bob with that character, no, but then again, I'm not, like, connecting Dumbland to anything at the moment, because like Dumbland seems like the weird stepchild at the moment.
Okay. For those listening who haven't watched Rabbits, I just want to like clarify the baseline of what we can say like more objectively is going on. But thank you, Professor, for spilling your beans. Allow me to spill some beans currently in a moment.
Yeah.
So as far as basics of what's going on, we have 3 characters in one room setting. Jack, a lot of times, will exit and enter throughout the door, which receives an applause.
Yes.
Notably, during the monologues that happen, if Jane or Susie enter through the door, they also get an applause. So it's not just Jack.
Yeah.
He just is the one coming and going for some reason. We almost always see Jane on the couch. We almost always see Susie ironing in the background, although she does a couple other things too.
Yes.
There's a consistent repetition of what time is it, not really knowing when things are happening. This often results in a laugh track. There's a consistent trend of someone asking what time is it, and the audience laughs. Similar to, again, the door opening, everyone applauds. There are other exceptions. Other times people laugh, other times people applaud, but that's the most often.
Yes.
There's a repetition of Jack having some kind of secret. And the relationship between the characters is unknown. We do not know if these 3 are family. They seem to live together, but not necessarily. So it's kind of up to the viewer to interpret, okay, is Jack the husband of one of these 2? Is Jack the father of anyone? Is Jack just a friend? Who are these people? You don't get context. You're being dropped in the midst of something that doesn't have context. Mm-hmm. Susie is often standing between them, behind them on the couch, or sitting between them on the couch. She's often positioned between them physically or off in the background.
Yes.
There's 2 appearances of the Red Rabbit character, who may or may not be a monkey. When he appears, Susie often enters with twin fires. Notably. This is where I think Twin Peaks came into my mind, but otherwise. Something happens a lot of times where the camera will go out of focus and then back in focus, usually at the start of a scene.
Yeah.
Almost like a scene transitional moment. And the order goes, there's a skit, then a monologue, then a skit, then a monologue, and kind of rinse, lather, repeat, altering characters with each monologue growing further than the one before it, oftentimes repeating the dialogue. The dialogue is all disjointed in that you usually cannot try to successfully pair up what someone says to the thing that's said before or after it. So, someone could be like, what time is it? Laugh track. The next person says, it's raining outside. And then the next person will say, it's the man in the green suit. And those things do not line up in any way, which prompts people to want to try to imagine it's all mixed up in some way. So some things that I kind of came away from this with, and I'll lead to some conclusions of my own later.
Very well.
First of all, with the time, it's stated that it may or may not be Friday. Someone says it's Friday, and then there's a laugh track. So it kind of calls it into question. I'm going to go with it probably is Friday, but the fact that there's a laugh track after Jane says it means that even like what day it is kind of being held in doubt. The laugh tracks to me oftentimes indicate a sense that the audience knows something the characters don't, like that a joke is being played on them, like dramatic irony right now.
Yes.
But they believe it's Friday. Let's go with that. The conversations then occur sometime after 7 p.m., going through to 8:30, going through to sometime after midnight. So from like 7 p.m. to midnight, we can try to locate the story. Is it all happening on Friday? I think so. I think it's happening within this 5-hour stretch in one day, but it could be multiple days, and on one of them it's Friday. That's up to you. I'm personally in the camp of it's all on one Friday in 5-hour spectrum.
It's all in one Friday over the course of like 6 months.
Could be. Very well could be. It's also been raining throughout this time period. Still raining late into the night. Jane at one point says that earlier she was at the harbor after it happened, whatever it is, and then it was raining there at the harbor too. This implies that Jane can leave the house, or at one point could.
Yes.
So it's not like they're trapped necessarily, depending on how much time you think has been from earlier. Was earlier in their past life, or was it 3 hours ago? That is up to you. But this means that theoretically Jane has been outside of here before.
Theoretically, yes.
There is at least one phone call with the potential of more. We have a moment where there's a phone ringing for a very, very long time before it gets picked up by Jack. And we don't necessarily know for sure, but there's other dialogue where someone, asks who was on the phone. That was Jane. And then Susie at one point says it was the voice of a man. And when I'm linking them together, it was the voice of a man seems like the answer to the question, who was on the phone? But Susie answered that question. She was not the one who picked up the phone during that scene. So either A, there's multiple phone calls. The one of Jack picking up the phone is not the same one that Susie knows the answer to. Or 2, Susie and Jack's lines are being interchanged in such a way where It's unknown if when Jack answered the phone, was it illustrating Susie answering the phone? Or is Susie speaking for Jack? The characters are blurring. Right? And there's also the evidence of multiple phone calls, because there's lines where Jack will ask, has anyone called? Or someone will say there have been no calls today.
Yes.
Or someone called for you earlier. So I'm of the camp of multiple phone calls that are happening. You see where I keep specifying I'm in the camp of, because there's so much wiggle room to what you think is going on. And again, I want to emphasize, I think that's kind of a thing that's supposed to be here. Yeah. And I think that that's a good thing. I think it's like purposefully very abstract. I mean, he just got off the wheels of Mulholland Drive. He's leaning into the idea that audiences will create their own story out of this.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
if you don't like that, that's fine. That's completely valid. It doesn't really give you a complete story. It gives you pieces.
It does. It absolutely gives you pieces. Like anyone could interpret, say, for example, when the phone rings and that answers. Sure, we can get all sorts of answers that amongst it. One person could overall know instinctively, but at the end of the day, it's the use of electricity, in which is recited multiple times inside the overall story itself. Someone could take that idea of electricity, say that electricity comes from the strange green man, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. The green suit dude, at one point, Jack answers that it was the man in the green suit. This could be a reference to a phone call. I think it's more a reference to when the door is opened and everyone looks outside after hearing knocking. So I think that when Jack says it was the man in the green suit, that is in reply of someone wondering who was at the door.
Why not both?
Could be both. The man in the green suit seems suspicious to me. There's implications for Blue Velvet, because there's a man in a green suit in Blue Velvet who is associated with crime. There will be a man in a green suit in The Return, which I cannot spoil.
It's me.
You'll have to evaluate how you feel about that later when you find out who it is. My Life, My Tapes has dreams of a man in a green suit. This gets to be weird because, again, David Lynch did not write the script. Did not write the book, but David Lynch did talk to Scott Frost, who wrote the book, and we know that at least 3 things Scott Frost was told to put in there by the creators. There could be a 4th one. For all we know, this man in a green suit was a thing that David Lynch wanted to do. For all we know, the man in the green suit was going to be in Twin Peaks Season 3. That didn't happen. We don't know what this means.
But you said there's a guy in a green suit potentially in The Return.
There is a person in the green suit in The Return. Is it the same person that would have been in Twin Peaks Season 3 from the 90s had the show continued?
I see.
That's what I mean is we don't know, because there's been some suspicion about certain things that are set up in different Twin Peaks material where it's like, well, maybe if there was a Season 3, this would have gone somewhere. We don't know. Maybe they were setting things up. Maybe they weren't.
Very well.
Either way, I also don't remember if there was any man in a green suit in either Mulholland Drive or Inland Empire. And it wouldn't surprise me if there was. I just don't remember from Mulholland Drive, and I need to see Inland Empire again, and I'll be keeping an eye out for that. But I feel like the idea of a man in a green suit has been done before in David Lynch, and it feels like a signifier, even if there is no signified, necessarily.
That's fair.
Throughout, there's a lot of questioning of where people have been, where others think they have been, and Jack saying that he has a secret. Jane says that she's going to find out one day. Another time, Jane says no one can know about this, whatever this is. Jane also says that there is something she would like to say to Susie. Jane at one point also refers to having known something since she was 7. This is a line I don't know what to do with. I have known since I was 7.
Laura Palmer, Laura Palmer, Laura Palmer, Laura Palmer.
Well, that does not match up 1-to-1 because
Not
Laura
1-to-1,
Palmer
no.
did not know since she was 7.
She did not necessarily know since she was 7, but still a young child having the overall experience of something being about, identifying the being as Bob, if you will, and then again the ending line inside of Walk with Me, notably in which I never knew you knew it was me.
Right.
Ha da ba da ba.
I'm going to continue scattering these pieces, and then I'll kind of tell you my own thoughts. I'm just trying to establish a baseline.
That's fine.
You tell me if I'm wrong or something, or if you want to jump in with your own Twin Peaks like you just did there. That's good. I like that. it breaks up me laying all this stuff out. So there's repeated references to a they. Jane wishes they would go somewhere, which I don't think is referring to the 3 in the room, although it could be. There's another reference where Susie says she's going to go get them. That does definitely not refer to the people in the room, you would think.
Yes.
So, 2 references possibly to a they. Then there's, again, the monologues themselves. Multiple mentions. So all three monologues share some things in common. All 3 monologues mention a cold and distant siren, the dark smiling teeth, something being wrong, and darkness. Jane's is the shortest. Jack and Susie's have some interesting similarities. Both Jack and Susie go oh, oh, oh in theirs. That could be nervousness. That could be surprise. I lean towards sex.
I lean to sex too, because again, the bed scene, because we also have crawling on the bed that is featured in both the mother scene as well as the potentially daughter scene.
So I assume the OOO is because Jack and Susie are involved with each other sexually.
Yes.
That's my contention.
Yep.
Both Jack and Susie also hum in theirs. I take that to be the electrical hum. I take the sense that there is an activity, a humming, and electricity. I also think of the way David Lynch describes music. There was something in the air, the humming. It feels like a David Lynch way of communicating an energy, probably a negative energy in this case.
An energy, a negative energy. I, for one, am thinking that since like these two characters are specifically humming and one of them is singing, these are two characters harmonizing, if you will.
And
these two characters are matching up.
Frequencies. And they're also both the ones mentioning the dripping socket, the hot electricity, and the lights going out. That is the thing those two reference together. All electric things. There's a lot of references to dogs wiggling, violence and blood, a green tear that could connect back to the man in the green suit, the legs high, which I think represents the legs high up during sex. That's what I'm thinking. Jane's monologue mentions at the beginning the groom. This is one that I had to go back because I'm like, is she saying room? No, it's groom. I'm pretty confident. I listened to it multiple times.
Jane foreseeing events, if you will. There is a marriage.
So this to me implies a wedding, and I noticed in Susie's monologue there were kissing sounds in the background.
No, she is actively making kissing sounds as she is continuing her final bits of dialogue.
And then all three of these monologues...
note overall the sexual nature of Laura Palmer that develops over time with this.
All three of these monologues have a red match being lit in the top right of the room, a burning through most of the runtimes of the monologues.
Red.
And fire. At the very end of the series, the door opens, the three look out the door, there's a scream, which could be from inside or outside. I interpret outside, but it could be inside. And the lights go out. There's a swinging light or darkness through the room and the open doorway. Susie approaches the door, and with the sound of her closing the door happens before the action. And notice that a few times where the sound effect is before the action that happens, further disorienting and disjoining the experience.
It gets worse as like time goes on, if you will. There's like some mild points that it's off towards the beginning, but by the very end, it is a significant gap. Like someone is sitting down clearly by the end, and then there's a door opening sound, which like someone actually then gets up and then goes over to do a door sound.
So there's a sort of harmony between Jack and Susie potentially, but everything else feels out of sync.
Yes.
Including the dialogue.
Which, mind you, again, I think that this adds towards the sitcom nature and the overall like feeling of that atmosphere, where you do realize, those sounds are very likely not going to pick up on any tiny microphone they'll set up on towards door. So likely, there's someone on a soundboard somewhere just pressing these as things are going on in the background. But also, when it gets so disoriented, but you're still hearing those recognized sitcom sounds, again, there's something in my brain triggers because I've heard these sounds before. Right. I've seen how they've gone, and I've experienced these through years of watching sitcoms. So when I hear laughter and I get an energy high when everything else is drawn out, it genuinely like puts me through a ride, if you will.
And again, the thing I like about Rabbits is that it is like a Rorschach test. It's something that you're given this vague stimuli that could be several different things, and you have to interpret it yourself.
Yep.
And I think there's something fun about hearing other people's interpretations of abstraction. I don't think there is an answer. I don't think you can like put a gun to the guy's head and say, well, is this a butterfly, a moth, or a gun or a vagina? What is this now?
It's a gun-gina moth fly.
It could be anything you want it to be or don't want it to be. It could be your fears or your loves. It could be anything. And that's what Rabbits is. So I'm going to tell you what I got out of it. That does not mean I think it's the answer. I don't think there is an answer.
Give me your gun-gina moth fly.
Jack is married to Jane. They have kids. That's the they. So I interpret that Jack and Jane are married. And that they have kids. Okay. Susie is likely Jane's sister. I think that who kind of lives with them or helps take care of the kids with them. And that's why they dress similar, they parallel each other, because they are sisters, but also because Jack is sleeping with both of them. So I think Jack is sleeping with his wife, but also with his wife's sister as an affair.
So I imagine then when you see the overall sit between them and they lean, if you will, that's more so either A, one of the like sitcom friendship moments inside of like a Friends, if you will, in which like they're just coming together, or B, it is something in which they're just both showing support. It's just showing that how that this person connected between the two of them.
I read into the way that Susie is always between them. She
Yes.
is the element between the two of them. They both are affectionate toward her. One is their sibling and one is their affair person.
Yes.
The other woman, they're both affectionate with her, but that she is becoming between their relationship, between their marriage, and she, along with Jack, are inviting a darkness, inviting a sort of electricity of a negative energy through the affair. If the secret isn't the affair itself, then Jack may have also been involved with a criminal element, which I link to the man in the green suit, either straight up killing someone or something. Either way, no one can know about this act that has happened.
Okay.
Either the affair itself or possibly a murder or crime. I think the ending is the secret getting out. When the door opens and there's the light and the screaming, I think it's the screaming of someone realizing something horrible, or else a representation of someone being killed.
Suddenly flashing lights sort of occur as the secret sort of is
Yes.
getting out, if you will. Very similar to flashing lights that are occurring, if you will, that happen inside the train car and so on.
And the red rabbit spirit, which Susie summons, could be a manifestation of the evil that she and Jack have summoned into their lives through the affair or through Jack's crimes. The fire could be a parallel to that. Even though I don't think of it as being the Palmer family, I do think that the lodge comparison is apt with what is going on.
With a green suit man out inside the rain and the door opening to the overall from the outside world, if you will, that could be overall just the green man that is just awaiting out there, and that's the secret being revealed. Which again, I think that's a Bob parallel. How it seems like the Leland character goes back and forth between it, not only shows the overall busyness of the father, but also the one who seems to potentially run into the green man because, hey, this overall Jack person might be that sort of like secret. That is the secret. The man in the green suit. Jack just wears a green suit. Whatever the color green will mean to David Lynch, whatever you want to give
The
forward.
saliva is also yellow, by the way, in the monologue.
Yep,
So.
the saliva is yellow. I don't even want to even start touching that. In more ways than one.
So that's where my brain led me. I think it's a valid rating. I don't think it's the
Yes.
rating. I don't think there is a the rating. I think that there's enough thrown at you that you can pick the pieces and prioritize and concretize in your mind whatever you think is going to fit your pattern of thinking. I think it's like a deconstruction of a story in a very literal sense of like, this is something that's been torn apart.
Yes.
The way that, like, if you're watching a food show and they have a deconstructed cake and it's just a bunch of piles of ingredients on a plate, this is kind of what you're given.
Now, mind you, one thing that I want to just sort of like bring forward, and you can give like a simple answer, you can give a complicated answer. I'm going to leave that up to you.
Sure.
Why rabbits?
So-
Why the physical appearance of rabbits do you think was chosen for this?
Firing off a few different cylinders. One idea would be, if we're going by the amount of electricity and meta nature of Twin Peaks and David Lynch's work, rabbit ears from television sets. There's the idea that rabbit ears are the way of receiving electricity and receiving a signal for like a TV set, like an old rabbit ear TV set
Okay.
situation. That seems very David Lynch.
Yes.
That seems very much like a thing he would consider doing. I also think that like they multiply like rabbits. That could imply the affair. They get busy like rabbits.
Sex.
That could be definitely part of it. It's an experiment that David Lynch is doing. He's making an experimental film. What animal oftentimes gets experimented on?
Rats.
Bits. Agreed.
As far as what I go for, I'm going for more of the, again, hear me flying my Twin Peaks
Oh, I got
flag
more
over
after
here.
you're done.
Fantastic. I'm going to go in between you.
Fair enough. You go ahead.
I'm going for more of like, when I think of like a rabbit, I'm thinking a very either A, interpreted as potentially innocent, or B, a harmless animal, something in which might be overlooked, but still a nice overall, like peaceful little creatures, if you will. And having that overall be, having that potentially be corrupted, if you will. Commonly, those little peaceful elements being corrupted, David Lynch oftentimes does, but also something that's unexpected, which I think that also we could interpret from the beginning towards what is revealed in Twin Peaks, if you will. The Laura Palmer family being fairly unassuming until, like, we actually dig deeper into their actual stories.
And the idea of a little bunny being corrupted is also part of why the children's book Benincula is so good and beloved.
Benincula?
Benincula was a formative book I read in second grade. There's a bunch of other books. There's like a series that apparently got made. I don't care about those things. I read some of the books. They weren't as good. I never watched the series. It came after my time. My point is, the original children's book Benincula, hilarious. Love it. Favorite book in second grade.
What is Benincula?
It's about a little bunny that gets picked up by the family, and they don't realize it's a vampire bunny, but the household cat, Chester, becomes really suspicious when all the vegetables start getting drained of their color and juice, and then catches Benincula with, like, having clearly drained the juice and life energy out of the carrots in the fridge. And then Harold is like the Sherlock Holmes. Well, he's more of like the Watson to Chester's Sherlock Holmes, and they are conducting investigations with Chester further and further like deluding himself into madness, obsessing over this case, trying to prove to the family that they have a vampire in their midst, but the family, unable to communicate with the animals, does not realize the danger that is present by their vampire bunny.
So Benincula is overall Bob/Leland,
Yes.
as well as, it seems,
Glad
the
you
cat
understand that everything is Twin
Cooper.
Peaks.
And then we also have the overall Watson character, if you will, that is also like Sheriff Truman. And so we have it all coming
Absolutely.
together.
All coming
It's
together.
all coming together perfectly.
Also, another thing I just kind of thought of as you were talking, you could also look at rabbits as being rabbit out of the hat, the magic element. That the jackrabbit leaving the house maybe is the rabbit coming out of the hat, going back in. There's magic, there's mystery, there's something unknown. The magician's secrets must not be revealed. I think there's something you could do with that. Also,
Farewell.
magician cries between two worlds. Jack appears to go between two worlds, very much so. Or the magician's that weird red bunny monkey thing. Who knows? There is a Twitter thread on r/TrueFilm subreddit from a deleted user, so I do not know the name to give credit. It's unfortunately gone now. But this user had said on the subreddit, what if the film is all the perspective of a caged rabbit, hence the single angle? The rabbit would perceive humans as really tall animals, and maybe it can't even see their heads, so it imagines rabbit heads on them. They have no perception of time as humans have constructed it, so the husband exiting and entering the room might be going to and from work. The rabbit can't quite perceive words, but it can hear them and understands the moods, hence the nonsensical, monotonous dialogue that stark changes in tone throughout the interactions. So this idea that perhaps the camera view is from the viewpoint of a caged rabbit, like looking at it, I don't believe this interpretation. It's not for me. I could try to poke at it, but I think it's creative.
Who put the rabbit so high on the shelf? Because
know.
we're like up here, so I would
That's
think
where
like,
my brain would go too.
Yeah.
But I think it's an interesting way of thinking about it.
It absolutely is.
Throughout the discussion, another user whose actual name is Moustachio on
Love
the
your
Reddit,
name.
mentions
I do,
that rabbits have a reputation for
genuinely.
producing endlessly, which I brought up earlier. There's this guy named, or girl, named Lord of Tamales, who, again, good name, responded, why must every piece of art have meaning? Rabbits is a surrealist film, and surrealism concerns the rejection of logic or reality. I don't think David Lynch wanted viewers to make attempts to broadly rationalize conclusions concerning the purpose or argument of the film. It is a film about rabbits is more than enough in explaining the plot or content of the film. So again, kind of that idea, they compare it to watching an installation of a modern art museum. So there's that sort of pull to just reject the idea of looking for meaning and just treat it as an abstract art piece in a museum. Many different styles of interpretations and thinking have been communicated about rabbits. A lot of it centers around the idea of a sitcom. There's an article from The Artifice titled Making Sense of David Lynch, A Rabbit's Tale. This goes into, again, the idea of it being a sitcom or a rearranging of a sitcom. The article says a lot of the same things that we've kind of already expostulated. Is that a word? Probably. But if you like that train of thought, that's an article to be checking out. There's some discussion about communication within the idea that these characters cannot communicate. 25 years later, article... There's an interview with Grace Lee of the YouTube channel What's So Great About That? And Grace Lee had made a video about David Lynch's work. And the interviewer, Cameron Crane, was asking about rabbits for a little bit.
Very well.
And Grace Lee of the What's So Great About That channel brought up a David Lynch quote, which is, the very foundation of inner human discourse is misunderstanding, and applied that to rabbits. The idea that like underlying human discourse and communication is misunderstanding at the root. Which again feels very deconstructivist in a way. Like there's always that sort of empty hole and absence in the communication from the start, that the very nature of communication is misunderstanding. You can never communicate exactly what you mean. You can never say exactly what you mean. And this is maybe a heightened version of that drama.
Oh, that's overall fascinating take.
And then the last one I came across was sort of a amalgamation of different people talking about limbo, purgatory, reincarnation, focusing a lot on the lines of like, were you blonde, Susie? And I wonder who will I... Blonde! And I wonder who I will be.
Were you blonde?
The idea of past lives, future lives, are these people who are going to be reincarnated as rabbits, like on their way? There's different interpretations there. Jack entering and leaving, and then Jane having mentioned being in the harbor raises questions how you navigate that. But definitely, like, on its own, this definitely reminds me of, like, you know, the 12 characters in search of an exit Twilight Zone episode, where you've got a minimal cast in a trapped, confined area. I totally do get the Purgatory Limbo vibes of the setting, because those two never leave. And even when Jack leaves, we don't know where he goes. It feels like there's one space left on Earth, and everywhere else is just abyss. So any other interpretations on rabbits that either you thought of or you had an interesting idea or comment about? Anything else with rabbits?
I'm pretty sure you could tell from my overall, like, commentary throughout this that my brain is pretty settled on one interpretation, if you will, more than others. I'm still intrigued by what you've brought forward, what these other individuals have brought forward. But I am part of the Twin Peaks Wonderful and Strange podcast, in which we've run over about 50 episodes, and I think that you have cursed me to forever see parallels, if you will.
Hey.
I genuinely feel confident on a lot of this.
Yeah. Speaking of curses.
However, like, madness it brings forward for, like, Laura Maddie individuals are the same person, I leave that up to the listener and yourself, Kalil.
Speaking of curses and madness.
And why do you really want to get into this? Like, I'm enjoying my time here, partaking on rabbits and hoping you could validate me. Don't bring me down there. Don't bring me down there.
Dumbland. Do 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 do. Dumbland, let's go. Dumbland, let's go. What are your general thoughts on Dumbland Professor?
If anyone is interested in taking my place in the Twin Peaks Logcast, please email us at snakeeyedreams@gmail.com or tweet at us at snakeeyedreams1, as in the numeral 1, as in, I have only one small thread of patience left after this. Kalil, I need you to understand. I need you to fully understand that as far as Dumbland is concerned, 1, animation is no small feat. David Lynch was taking on a new skill set.
They wear big shoes.
If you will, and was learning through this overall process, was partaking on it, and made something. As far as items are concerned, whenever it comes to any form of media, especially whenever it's in a drawn form, in a comic style, in an animated style, in a cartoon style, it's a heavy undertaking. It is something that is commendable. I commend him for it because I know so many individuals, and this also includes by extension myself. Maybe I'm even venting that out a little bit here. In the respects of some people become a bit more perfectionist, trying to make sure that these details are out, making sure that everything sort of like is nicely tied up and wound up. As far as Dumbland is concerned, it seems that overall David Lynch has released it. It seems that for the most part,
it seems as though he has released it. I agree.
It seems as though he put something together and used those overall skills to throw something out there that I don't think that personally, maybe I'm wrong, but from the way that he overall talks about the work, from the way that you show me how he talks about the work, it seems that he has presented it in a capacity that he is satisfied with, but not in a way that I see as fine-tuned, if you will. It seems that he's just proudly presented a piece of work that he potentially sees humor in. It's an overall project.
And I want to take his work and put it on the fridge, and I'm proud of my son.
The sound of the intro of this series is the sound you hear before you snap, because every time it came up, as I kept trying to push myself forward through the overall series, I felt like every bad chemical in my brain that is adjacent to pain, the thing that tells me, no, stop this, don't go any further, the pain receptors that make up the chemicals in my head told me no. And there's only quantifiably one portion of the entire 30-plus minute experience where I looked at it and I was thinking, I kind of like this. And that was at the end. And I'm going to tell you right now, listener, I'm being frank on it. It's not, and I don't believe it is anyway, because it was coming to the end and my brain was starting to feel some relief. There was genuinely, I would say, a nice music number that happened between it. But beyond that, there is shit. There is noise.
Literally, yeah.
There is just all sorts of nonsense compiled together in a way that it is the anti-media. It is the as far as I'm concerned, and from what I've interpreted David Lynch's words that you have shared with me, this is the Dada that David Lynch has brought forward, and I'm not exactly the biggest fan of Dada. And I'm not a fan of this Dada, at the very least. I'm very much not a fan of this Dada. I came out in a form that walked into the apartment, and you knew that today was the day for the overall episode. You knew that I was checking it out and taking my notes last night, and I knew that you knew that, and you were waiting for that response. All I could do is like walk into the room, walk into the adjacent room to be out of your eyesight, to sigh, to let out air in order for me to face you.
Professor, who hurt you?
You.
Professor,
You decided on Dumbland for this, and you may have some fantastic reasons. And again, genuinely, I think that what David Lynch did was impressive. I think that he should be commended for it. I also see Dumbland as the thing of my kryptonite. I see it as the thing that I am going to look at and see as my hell for all the punishments I deserve
Professor,
after my death.
why do you think Dumbland took you behind the store and like robbed you in the alleyway and took all your money? Why do you think this happened?
Because every single moment that I'm seeing with this, there was what I saw as a point that could give off humor, but it did not interpret towards me, and it instead, again, in my mind, the thing that I can't exactly control, the thing that tells me my preferences, just put a big old red X on it. Dumbland, as a series, seems like the fake, absurd show that you put into a bad comedy movie, in which is to show that the main character looks at it, and that person's supposed to seem superior, because this media is not supposed to be great at all. It's something in crap, and to make the other person feel superior so that the directors and writers can feel superior, to be like, yeah, at least our comedy, which has all sorts of least jokes, it's not like that one, except it is a singular experience meant to be taken not seriously, but be taken as a piece of individual media. This doesn't feel real, Kalil. This does not feel like a piece of media that came out on its own on a subscription basis. And for anyone who enjoys it, for anyone who adores it, for anyone who's laughing at it, I am happy for you. I'm genuinely happy that there are people out there who enjoy Dumbland. But for me, if there is one singular thing that I can see from Dumbland, it is just pure whatever is the opposite of serotonin. I can't think of it right now. I can't conceive it right now. Kalil, you kept telling me how you wanted to overall see this overall work with me, and I gotta say I'm thankful for not, because elsewise I would be heavily distracted to stare daggers right back at you as loud noises go on. It was just like, my teeth are bleeding, or whatever the quote was there.
I think Dumbland's pretty aight. I think it's kind of fun. I think it's like a kind of a dumb cartoon. It's like a 6 out of 10. It's aight. I like it better than the Elephant Man, probably. I think Pure and Sunny Jim. It's a distilled 3 minutes of it. I think is more creationally, artistically pure. I think that the overall quality of Pure and Sunny Jim just barely beats it out for me. But it's a good time. I used to dislike it. Because I was trying to compare it to other David Lynch work, and that was not like a fair comparison. Now I'm just looking at it for what it is, and I'm like, I think some of it's funny, not most of it, but I think some of it is. And I think the style of the animation, the way everything just kind of rapidly moves while in place, that's pretty cool. I think that it's very funny that David Lynch made this. That David Lynch completely just goes for this. He doesn't have any higher artistic virtues here. I think that if anyone looks at David Lynch as being, in some way too artsy or too pretentious or whatever, I think Dumbland is a great antidote to say, no, this guy can be dumb. This guy can purposefully, not even with any sense of I don't think irony or he just made this. And it just is what it is. There's no point to this. It's just Dumbland. It is what it says on the tin. And I appreciate that.
I am happy for you.
It's like if you go to the like dollar store or like a gag store and you buy like a little individual piece of fake poop that you want to like put somewhere to like trick someone like a grandparent or a little kid or something with the fake poop. I'm glad that someone's making fake poop out there. Dumbland is the fake poop of David Lynch's filmography.
And I'm happy for you on that. But I gotta say, fake poop lasts as long as Pure and Sunny Jim. 30 seconds of potential laughter, 30 seconds of a point in which like you're seeing a reaction, and that 30 seconds of putting that fake poop straight into the trash because you'll never use it again. This goes on for 30 plus minutes. Listener, if you are curious and want to see Dumbland, and if you are like me, and this is not your thing, but you still want to go through it, go in pieces. Take your time. Go experience.
It'll leave you in pieces.
It leaves me in pieces.
I think 30 minutes is fine. I don't think it would have made sense to make this much longer than that. I think, it would have been kind of funny if this was like a 5-hour experience, but I think it makes sense that he got 30 minutes out and he's like, yep, I'm done with this now. I'm going to stop. And then he stopped. And then he didn't do it anymore. And this came out the same year as Rabbids, which again, I just think is like very funny that these two projects, shortly after Mulholland Drive, they both were happening at the same time. This extremely high concept, abstract art, and then this extremely low concept, just like crass piece of art. I like that those two coincide.
There are moments where, for about, if I'm not mistaken, about 3 to 5 minutes, you have 3 things screaming at the same time before a 4th one joins in towards the end of all of it.
That's art.
In which it is art. It is art. It is art.
Yes.
It is just the art in the gallery in which I veer left at. I respect the people who stay there to check it out. I cannot.
So David Lynch doesn't remember exactly when he first got the idea for Dumbland, although he has admitted that as he's drawing, ideas kind of sort of come to him as he's doing this. And as he was drawing this character that would later become Randy, the main character, ideas started to become conjuring up in his mind, ideas of what the character's world and life were like, and it made David Lynch laugh. So one thing led to another, and he started making these. The drawing style, with sort of roughness to it, the minimalist plots, very similar to David Lynch's comic strip, The Angriest Dog in the World, which ran from 1983 to 1992. Very similar to David Lynch's comic strip.
Wait, when was it running? Because
I don't think it was the whole way through, but 83 to 92 is what I'm reading. I have not explored the comic strip yet.
And would you say that like the art style is similar? Do you think is the humor similar?
Yeah, if you just like Google the Angriest Dog in the World, David Lynch comic, if you look at the images, there was a reprinting in September 2020. I haven't located that yet, and I might at some point have to look and see if it's available. But there were only 17 strips, so this is spread over 9 years, but they're not released very often.
Yeah,
and the art style is pretty similar to what I would say Dumbland is, and the actual comic strip is very much like almost the same thing exactly every single time. But the introduction at the top of the comic strip of every single caption is, "The dog who is so angry he cannot move. He cannot eat. He cannot sleep. He can just barely growl. Bound so tightly with tension and anger, he approaches the state of rigor mortis." So just again, this idea of a very closed environment, extremely angry character used for sort of absurd dark comedy. There is an element in which that kind of bleeds through Dumbland.
It does bleed through Dumbland, and again, like these characters conceivably sort of like popped into his head and he sort of like came forward with a sense of fear. Now, mind you, having like very like overall like not inside the good moral question of a character, then translating to humor, that's not too uncommon, if you will. Some people believe that some ends go too far in one respect, and some people feel that things aren't going far enough. That's just the subjective end of comedy. I'm looking towards this and just thinking of the overall humor. Like, has David Lynch discussed like his sense of humor like more than like as far as like these comics and like this overall?
I feel like
So it
David
goes-
Lynch, to what I understand, I mean, I haven't poured through every single interview, but I
Yeah.
feel like generally he's not being asked about his sense of humor very much.
Yeah.
I do think that he'll admit comedy even in his darkest of films. You know, if someone asks him, is this part in Blue Velvet funny? I think he would say that there is an aspect in which you can find things humorous. I think he finds humor in almost every one of his films, even the darkest ones. And I think his sense of humor almost speaks for itself the more you look at his filmography, that he does have this sort of crassness to him and sort of this lingering on the everyday, day-to-day absurdity of like suburban middle-class anger.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing that aids in overall David Lynch's delivery in humor, at least for myself, is probably very dependent on the actors. If I'm not mistaken, Dumbland seems to be like voice directly
Yes,
from
all
him.
David Lynch.
All David Lynch. So whenever I see like an angry individual that is very loud, very crass, and just continues to overall shout, and then literally like poop flies out of his butt, I then think of like Frank from
Right.
David Lynch's past works, and someone
Right.
who is very loud, very crass, and maybe poop flies out of his butt. We never got a chance to interview him onto that. But overall, still two separate deliveries and two still doing something with that. But I think that the charisma the actor gives forward is something that links better and is more applied towards mine, which I'm able to grab onto a little bit easier.
I think they're doing different enough things that I do judge them a bit differently.
They
but
do it different.
You still can have a preference.
Yeah.
I can understand that.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of like moments comparatively, if we will, with David Lynch's work where I see like humor and so on. This is just like it's so loud.
Yeah.
This is like the loudest.
Yeah,
that
the
I've seen
max
like
volume.
David Lynch's. Yeah. This one goes up to 11.
I mean, Gordon Cole can hear every word. You'd mentioned earlier the work that it takes to make this animation. A little bit more on that.
Yeah.
David Lynch says it takes about 60 hours to produce an episode of Dumbland. About 2 to 3 days to mix it. Each 3-minute episode in total takes David Lynch 10 days to make. So as a result of that, he made some episodes. The process got longer, or most so that as he went on, he realized how long the process was, and I think it became no longer like as sustainably interesting or fun or creative anymore.
Yes.
So we ended up with the 8 or so episodes we got by the end of it. The soundtrack was created at his home in front of a computer, and he drew the animation with a mouse. In case you were wondering how he made these beautiful images. Beautiful images. David Lynch talks about how the first episode is ridiculously simple and poorly drawn, but later by episode 7, David Lynch got more of the hang of Flash, and it looks a bit smoother. So if you noticed a quality increase in the visuals of it over the course of the series, David Lynch has admitted to such.
There's a literal musical number that occurs in which also has more arcs, if you will, between like the character as well as the Legion of Bats. So no, I most certainly see it.
Regarding his voice acting, David Lynch talks about having a little mirror that he uses to get the facial contortions right for his characters as they speak. And he goes on to say, "And I have a box. It's as big as this coffee cup and just as expensive. There are little artifacts in the voice. So for some of the things, this box is perfect. I'm interested in real-time voice manipulation. I want to sing like John Lee Hooker, and I want to do it in real time." So that's some context on his voice acting strategies. There's an article over on 25 Years Later by Robbie King titled "Dumbfounded: Viewing David Lynch's Dumbland," where there's some things he noticed. There's a recurring common theme throughout the episodes of people looking over fences. The idea of breaching privacy seems to be a personal frustration for Lynch. When he was making Rabbits, it was obviously a frustration for Lynch that he had neighbors. But throughout his work, the idea of someone looking in on what he's doing, someone trying to control what he's doing, someone snooping, that may be a thing there. And the sort of anger. We've talked before about that Michael J. Anderson experience where David Lynch supposedly had talked about wanting to like rear end or drive this guy off the road for passing him the way he did, and then we saw a manifestation of that kind of like that in Lost Highway. So there's this element in David Lynch that does seem to be angry. I've mentioned before hearing about some of the ways he'll get extremely angry about the wrong material being grabbed for a scene in a set for something.
Yeah.
So there is an anger to David Lynch that generally doesn't appear, but I could see it finding a voice in Dumbland. This might be one of the clearest indications of David Lynch's anger in all of his work.
Yeah, no, I think either anger or just a sense of overall just venting multiple emotions into one. There's multiple points in which, say, for example, in either A, David Lynch's perspective in all good fun, or B, maybe like David Lynch's criteria of things that overall like frustrate or upset him, we see multiple instances where, say, for example, the main character, what was his name?
So Randy is what he's called.
He's called Randy. I
don't think in the show they give any credits or anything like that.
In my notes, I called him Dumb because this is his land.
I believe David Lynch came up with the name Randy. I think it was confirmed on the website, but the actual material itself, there is no name. So
yeah,
depending on how much of a purist you want to be, I'm going to use Randy for the sake of simplification. I think the name Randy fits.
Yes.
But if you have your own name for him, I don't think there's anything to counter you in the work itself.
Yeah, no, as far as Randy goes, where
the patriarch of the house.
The patriarch of the house, the one whose shirt becomes his skin and then somehow becomes his shirt throughout the entire series. The neckline just sort of like disappears.
Yeah.
This person, if you will, is probably like someone who continues to be violent, grotesque, and very, very, very loud throughout the entire sort of course, if you will. It does not seem like anyone really turns out well. He lets his child run around naked, but it seems like that's probably his closest idea to a potential ally amongst any of the individuals throughout the overall series. But yeah, no, it's a lot of what occurs with this character and the other characters inside of it. No one really comes out looking all too great.
David Lynch says, quote, Dumbland is a crude, stupid, violent, absurd series.
Yeah.
It is, if it is funny, it is funny because we see the absurdity of it all. So I actually, again, this is where I think like his taglines are pretty well aware. You would agree it's a crude, stupid, violent, absurd series.
Yes.
And he says, if it is funny, it's funny because we see the absurdity of it all. If you find it funny. He does not even like really state that like it is funny. He's just like, hey, it's crude and it's stupid. It might be funny as well.
Yeah.
So I like the way he describes his own work there. Originally, David Lynch was very optimistic about using Flash to create these new things independently. He's also very optimistic about the early internet. As obviously he had used the early internet to produce this work, as well as distribute this work and Rabbits. Quote, the internet is a place where we can get all our own setup and have full freedom, and that's super important. The internet, the way I see it, provides opportunity for experiments, so I can try one little bit of something and that can lead to a whole other world. It could lead to a feature film, but maybe not. It's all about ideas and being able to realize them. And it may just be little fragments, but the internet is kind of good for little fragments, and these may open up other worlds. Versus, he also said about television is not free. It's a place where freedom, it's not a place where freedom really exists. So his experiences with Twin Peaks having burned him out, his experiences with films being good and bad, depending on the film, still lingering over the memories of Dune and not getting final cut, and even other films having to cut out material. The internet was a very liberating, free space for him to work. When we get into Inland Empire soon, I know that the freedom of digital camera is also something he's very enthusiastic about. I feel like this is an aspect of Lynch that I haven't heard from as much in recent years. And again, I don't follow every interview he's ever been in, so maybe he still feels this way about the internet. But I know there's a popularized sort of memeing happening where people in film groups will kind of make fun of the idea that David Lynch would get really angry if you watched a film on a phone. He's made quotes about the idea that he thinks it's just not right. So he seems to think, at least in the early days of the internet, that the internet is able to be a place to create and share little bits of media in a way that you couldn't do through traditional television, traditional industry formats like movies. And he liked that. But as time went on, I feel like he hasn't embraced technology as a full medium for all the ways it can make media accessible.
Which I find interesting. Like, again, he still made this. He still went through a skill set and still produced this.
I would totally watch Dumbland on a phone.
In Dumbland. But what I'm getting at more so than anything is that utilizing overall technology, even like uncommon, like has been seen through David Lynch's works. Like, recall the overall chance he had, if you will, with one of the oldest forms of like recording a film was made in that strange sort of like almost sci-fi-esque short film that we saw earlier with David Lynch's
Premonitions following an evil deed.
Yep. And that seemed like overall an exciting opportunity that he took full.
Well, that was more in the 90s.
It was full in the 90s, and like again, times changed, and we keep moving forward and forward. And David Lynch is now mainly using like media at this point for still snippets, if you will. Like, say, for example, with his YouTube channel, he's constantly, like, bringing in, like, weather reports?
Weather reports, numbers of the day.
Yes.
Very small things, yeah.
Yes. I suppose that I'm very interested that David Lynch kind of like plays in it with like smaller pieces of media to distribute when
I don't see him using it as often. Fire Posar, it seems like existed for a while before he actually translated it to being on YouTube. I think it had been exhibited before but never widely released.
Yeah.
And this was a way to self-publish it essentially. David Lynch flirts with it, but I don't think he fully embraces it, I guess would be my end statement.
Very well.
And that optimism he had early on, I don't think continued as strongly as time went on, from what I can tell. But I do think it's, again, interesting to follow his creative output and to look at not Inland Empire, look at Rabbits and Dumbland as being footnotes of his career.
Okay.
So yeah, according to David Lynch, the hero of our story is called Randy, and we get some elements of his life throughout the work. In episode 6, the My Teeth Are Bleeding episode, there's this emphasis on constant noise in his life. There's the son shouting while playing, his wife screaming about something, wrestling on the TV, the traffic outside, and this continues to escalate for all these background details.
Now,
violent crime starts happening outside. The son's teeth do start bleeding. His wife is gurgling on choking on blood or something.
Is all of this your description so far, or is that any of this like taken from like other sources? Or
This is my wording.
This is your wording. Very well. Screaming, I agree. Screaming about something,
yes,
contestable.
Fair enough. She's definitely screaming.
She's making the same sound.
I think she's screaming about something, but the communication isn't there.
She never communicates anything outside of it. She runs on a treadmill, and the rest of the series, she screams.
Well, I think we're viewing Dumbland filtered through Randy's perspective. I think
Perhaps.
He's viewing her as the nagging wife. I don't think he cares what she's saying, so I think to him, it's like Charlie Brown with the teachers, except pitched up to max.
Is this also how Randy sees himself?
I don't think so. I think Randy sees himself as a pretty normal dude, trapped in a confusing and annoying and messy place, you know? Mm-hmm. That's my interpretation. And eventually there's that fly entering the room, and that's finally what annoys him and sets him off. I really like episode 6, My Teeth Are Bleeding. I feel like thematically it's one of the most tight and clear, in a good way, in the sense that there's this overarching feeling that this is the day-to-day life of Randy, just surrounded by this constant noise, agitation, distraction, and excess stimuli, and he just kind of ignores it all. He's so numb to it at this point that his child suffering, his wife screaming and choking on her own blood, the noise of the TV, the noise of the world outside, it is all neutral and numb to him. Until a fly comes and disturbs his relative peace.
And honestly, as far as the interpretation goes, it makes sense. I think that is executed in a fashion that is correct. It's overstimulating.
It is.
It is very
I think very effectively and purposefully so.
It is very, very, very effective.
That's like, to me, complaining about a horror movie being too scary.
No,
this is trying to be, I think, ridiculous.
I think that there is a level in which, like, say, for example, when a horror movie takes inside of the realm of horror, dependent on the type of horror, people can start making the argument. I think that overall, say, for example, when it comes to, like, a stimulation of horror, there are those who look at, say, for example, the sequels to Human Centipede and how the centipede keeps on sort of like extending in absurd amounts. I think that there are arguments that people can still propose and put forward in which they say, okay, what is this doing now that isn't beyond that shock value, and how effective is that shock value as far as this piece of media goes?
And to be fair, even if you just determine that, this thing is very gross to the extreme, it is valid to say you don't enjoy it.
Yes.
You could think that something is very well done, that it is very consistent and logically an extension of what it's trying to do and trying to be.
Yes.
And still be like, it's not for me.
Yeah.
And that's valid.
Yeah.
I just definitely don't think it's a fault of the work in this particular case.
It's not a fault of the work. No,
I do think that it's consistently gross in a way that feels purposeful to me, or at the very least feels like it's trying to do something with it.
There's never a point where I think Dumbland is inconsistent with itself.
Yeah.
It's just I don't like itself.
That's totally fine. Randy is a disgusting person. He's horribly violent. So Randy, and I try to be careful about, making judgments about characters and about things if there's a sort of sympathetic element. There's hardly a sympathetic element with Randy. He seems to be...
Is there, like, you said hardly. Is there?
I don't think there is, personally.
Okay.
I could be wrong. He seems to be an abuser. He seems to be incredibly hostile to both the family and friends he knows, as well as any random person that happens to be in his way. He assaults his wife when the treadmill exercises that she's doing annoy him, and he's watching football, drinking his beer. She starts making too much noise, so he attacks her. When he's angry at his screaming wife, Randy squashes his wife's head, which shrivels up and then reforms as a pretty face. The salesman, who also, by the way, looks horrifying. The salesman's the scariest looking person in the series. The salesman wants to sell Randy something that makes things smell good. Randy then attacks him, at which point the salesman's neck and head go flying back. And through straining breath, the salesman recites the Gettysburg Address, which I was noting is a Abraham Lincoln motif. Abraham Lincoln keeps appearing in David Lynch's work. Judas Booth, The Return. The friend who visits Randy is dressed in an old-fashioned Western style, going up fishing in the mountains, and the two bond over their fondness for killing fish, killing deer, killing sheep, cutting their heads off. The man also apparently cuts off the heads of horses, dogs, cats, and pigs. Everything that's not a person, but like everything else pretty much.
Yeah.
Is enjoyed the killing. And this goes beyond just someone enjoying hunting for the sport or for the challenge, or it's a thing with nature, or it's spending time with family, or it's, getting good food for the family. This is enjoying it for the sake of killing and like dismemberment.
Yes.
The lowest, most dishonorable parts, arguably, of the act. This is not a commentary, I don't think, on people who just like to hunt. This is a commentary on someone who likes the macabre, like bloody, disgusting elements of it.
Yes.
Which, again, that I find to be a little bit upsetting, but fittingly so. In terms of Randy's philosophy, there's some weird little speckles we get of his ideas and mindset, although we don't obviously get his internal narration, internal monologue. Randy has an appreciation for a nice shed. But he doesn't care that who the shed belongs to. So he insists that that's a nice shed. Talking about his neighbor's shed. But when the neighbor's like, that's my shed, he just completely doesn't care.
Which, mind you, as far as characters go, especially with the sound of the character, if you will, the neighbor, the one-armed neighbor,
yes,
is someone who, I, at the first point, interpreted that was the character we were going to follow instead of Randy. Randy does not seem like the protagonist, if you will. He seems like the very loud neighbor who might overall, cause issue, if you will. But no, in fact, his overall admiration of the shed is how we're introduced to the character before we get to the very more violent tendencies.
When the small son gets injured on the treadmill or by the treadmill, instead of trying to help his son or having any sort of sympathy, Randy immediately just calls him an effing twit and just kind of, again, turns away from the situation. When he finds his lamp is broken with just a bulb with no lampshade, he gets just inordinately angry at this idea. We can comment about electricity and the idea of a bulb without a lampshade all we want, but Randy gets very mad about this very specific thing. Just little things set him off.
Yes.
On these giant rampages. He tries fixing the lamp himself, which involves him touching the wire inside while the lamp is still plugged in, thus electrocuting himself, which prompts a doctor to come in, start prodding, poking, escalating to the point where he's stabbing him in the head to find out if it hurts him, and eventually reaches a point where Randy, after not really being affected before, suddenly snaps and attacks the doctor, which afterward prompts the doctor to say, "Just as I thought, you're completely normal." And this is where I'm not really sure how much to read into that line. Is David Lynch trying to make a statement with that line, or is it, again, just kind of an empty joke? The idea that the person who is numb, then suddenly spontaneously angry, violent, aggressive, and bloodthirsty, that's normal to the doctor?
If we are going to go through the lens that David Lynch proposes, if you will, any other response into it would make sense. This is an absurd angle. Again, I compare this overall to work such as Dada. It is something in which the overall difference in it, the absurdity of it, is somewhat of the appeal.
I think the episode that you pointed out earlier with the ant musical number,
which is the last episode,
it does have some interesting implications depending on how you interpret it, because what happens is Randy sprays himself in the eyes with the pesticide trying to kill these bugs, and it causes him to hallucinate, a singing ant woman and chorus of ants. And if you interpret those words as being from his own mind, right, the ants are not actually doing this. It is part of his subconscious and his mind, which I would lean into that interpretation.
Either A, because the overall terms of it is just calling him an overall asshole, just constantly mocking and taunting him. Is this a situation where, say, for example, that's what he thinks that every, like, thing that is annoying him is just calling out, and he believes that that is just the world's echoes, or is it from his own personal perspective?
And I think that's up to you to figure out and interpret. I don't know. I mean, I think it could go either way, because he doesn't act like he's self-aware. He doesn't act like he's dealing with any sort of concerns about his own morals or his own behavior. He seems to be completely reckless in that regard.
Yeah.
But it also could be it's all internalized, and he is aware of the fact that he's an awful person, and instead of trying to actively fix those things, he just gets more angry about it.
Yeah.
So even he's aware of his own anger issues, but instead of solving them, he just gets more angry about his anger issues, thus further capitulating this sort of negative self-idea, further and further burying himself in this sort of idea that he is, a giant turd.
Or even, if you want to, again, push things even further, like, say, for example, we've brought up themes in Twin Peaks constantly about the lack of, like, medical aid that comes from people who either are neglectful or unable to perform for their overall jobs and occupations. If you take the overall doctor's instance, if you will, saying that Randy's normal, and clearly after stabbing him, after, like, doing all these sort of things, and Randy's clearly just not okay, and then he just says, yeah, you're normal, and that probably just leads Randy to go about his day. You can put up those sort of angles. It's not my reading, but I can see it as a reading.
I think there is enough here to comment on that, even though this is a very stupid show. I do think that there is a sense of coherence and ideas behind it that are a little bit more to chew on in respect of other Lynch ideas that we've seen before from him. I do think that the ending, while it is an abrupt ending, it's not like there's no narrative to the series necessarily. I think it's a good thematic ending because throughout we get this idea that little tiny things upset him. The fly buzzing in the room, the insects he's trying to eliminate, the noise of neighbors, the interruption of salespeople, the interruption of his family, and I feel like ending it on the note of...
He's in a shell covered by these tiny things.
Well, not covered, but they're like going inside.
They're going inside.
That he cannot escape an endless march of little annoyances, and it ends with him screaming as a result. Kind of being an extended metaphor for his life.
Yeah.
He is unable to escape. He is unable to move. He is going to be completely inundated for the rest of his life for these little tiny annoyances going to eat away at him and infiltrate. And that is his destiny. So I think thematically it's actually a really good ending.
Thematically speaking, yes, it would be.
A lot of stuff here with the human body that I wanted to note. The neighbor has a false arm. For one, there's the idea of a physical abnormality in the person having a false arm. There is the little son, and I love how the little son and the son of Randy, they're like breathing as that episode with the man with the stick in his mouth, and just the sound of like breathing and like noises. There's a very physical element to this animation. I don't see a lot of things that are animated with so much emphasis on like breath sounds as this has sometimes. And again, going with that idea of the person with the stick in their mouth, excellent sound design. There's the crunching of the guy after the Randy's broken his neck, the squishiness with the pulpiness. There's the great punchline at the end, like, Effer never even said thank you. To all the just got done like massacring this guy to get the stick out of his mouth. Again, Randy's solution to every problem, instead of like thinking it through and like trying to apply some logic to it, is just to destroy and mangle and mash until eventually things get better.
Violence is apparently always the answer, yes.
But there's, again, that physicality to it. This is where I get a little bit unsure of how to feel. The wife's mom is depicted as very, very large, having a sort of deep masculine voice. There is a groin bulge on the character, and the nipples are like poking hard out. And I'm going to read into it. I don't think it's necessarily problematic, but it does conflate the idea of gender a bit here, where I think if someone could find this a bit out of bad taste. Because it's sort of doing the thing where it's conflating a male and female identity into a character, largely, I think, for comedy, which I could see being not necessarily everyone's favorite thing. I take it less to be like a transphobic joke than I do sort of the distortion of this character and sort of someone that actually manages to be a threat to Randy himself.
Yeah.
The mother-in-law, who's this imposing figure, who's just like ripped and destructive. So I think it is like someone who can even one-up Randy here. But if someone read it as out of bad taste, I would understand.
Yeah, no, I think that episode in general could be read out of bad taste, especially with the individual. I believe it was the uncle, if I'm not mistaken.
Uncle Bob.
Uncle Bob, who is left to be in the care of these individuals, and it seems that the interpretation of Uncle Bob still continues those overall negative and just like very loud affects. But is now being put on towards someone who may need additional care overall for their overall life.
But is that like offensive in a way that you find to be
I can see
demeaning or problematic outside?
I can see someone reading that, and
Okay.
As far as I'm concerned,
I guess I did not see a depiction of any marginalized group or person here. More just that this character has been created who just, again, suffers.
Yes.
Uncle Bob, again, this is where I don't read into the Bob name similarity here. Uncle Bob just has this rapid, loud animal breathing. Well, actually, no, the animal breathing is more Randy. Uncle Bob is more like the panting. His illness escalates to the point where he eventually is biting his own foot off. He's taken to the hospital. At one point, the wife's mom threatens to cut off Randy's privates if he lays a hand on Uncle Bob.
Yeah.
So there's, again, this physicality to this series that I think is interesting, between false limbs, exaggerated proportions, subverting proportions, sickness, disease, pulpy, aggressive violence, breathing, that I don't know if there's like a bigger message to take away necessarily, but this is one of the works that I've seen that really leans into that direction.
Yes.
Even Rabbits has that mention of disease. I feel like it's not as obvious of a theme as like electricity throughout David Lynch's work, but I go back to 6 men getting sick. You know, you go back to the warts on the child from Eraserhead. There is an element of physical ailment and suffering throughout Lynch's work that I'm going to have to put in my secret pin document.
More and more and more pins.
And we move one step closer to removing potential pins and adding more potential pins with our next episode. We're looking at the Twin Peaks card art.
Now, mind you, with this card art, there's a lot of bits of trivia that happens through this overall piece. We're going to be probably treating it like a book pod, if you will, just because...
It's a little different.
It's a little bit
It's kind
different.
of like Diane, where it's a very strange form of media that isn't quite a book narrative, although there is an order to the cards that is recommended. They do have some elements of trivia and internal fictional logic to them.
It feels like, and this is my interpretation from like looking into it so far, it feels like you take the footnotes from something like Welcome to Twin Peaks, but it's just a book of only the footnotes.
If you're looking to check out these cards prior to our episode, there are certain websites that have posted images, photos of the cards themselves. So that is something you can seek out for yourself if you are so inclined.
Not to mention, it's also available through something such as the Z to A collection,
Yes.
where there is a special feature where you can flip through each individual card.
So, depending on what version you may have physically of Twin Peaks, you may in fact already have the cards digitally. So, something to look into. I do think that they are worth your time. I've gone through and looked at the cards and already got my notes probably done. But I really enjoyed my time with them. I was surprised how much I enjoyed my time with them. They are very funny. So I look forward to that episode with you, Professor, and Reader. I'm making like, is it Yoshi who makes those sounds? No, that was good. I'm making noises, all I'm saying, that are supposed to be listener. I hope you enjoy those cards as well if you're checking them out for the first time. Wonderful and strange questions of the week. Whoa! Who put that in my script? Who put that in my list of notes of things to bring up?
You.
I did. What? So number one, you already kind of said this earlier, but just to confirm, which episode or moment from Dumbland is your favorite? Last
Next
episode.
question.
Cool. For me, by the way, it's Get the Stick. Or My Teeth is Bleeding. My teeth are bleeding. Both those. Get the Stick is probably my favorite. My Teeth are Bleeding is probably second, and I feel like they're both very similar episodes. I love them. Which series do you like better, Dumbland or Rabbits?
Rabbits. Rabbits.
Okay, I'm going to change the question a little bit.
Rabbits.
Which series do you think is made better?
Rabbits.
Why? Not necessarily your preferences, just which one do you think was a better made product?
It is something that I feel overall, A, relies on multiple individuals. I think that David Lynch, if he's put into this singular box with a lot of it being more so his overall voice, his overall art, and his overall style and pacing, I think that as far as this media as an example goes, maybe he can make something else that's separate, if you will. It's like David Lynch starring as himself inside of his house. Who knows? I think in this case, it's something in which I'm not seeing other flavors pop out that make up a stew of media that I think he's stronger with. I think that genuinely he's a stronger director and writer at times. That I think that when it comes down to something like Rabbids and having that singular camera focus and having these other portions of media play into something that's different from an overall general genre, it's something that I find more enticing and something that I can genuinely recommend to more people. I don't see many people I can bring forward something like Dumbland to. I feel like there's a specific set of people, even more. I know, but more specific though. Like I
even
feel
more specific than just one person.
Yes, more specific than just one person. For some reason, it seems like you still are in that category.
It's me.
No. Like I can bring it forward to these other individuals. They won't partake from it, but I think that at the very least, I won't be looked at and questioned as much if I bring forward
I find that
Rabbids.
very interesting that you're saying Dumbland is more going to get you questioned than Rabbids.
Yes.
They're both really questionable things to just suddenly show a random person.
Yes.
Both of them would be, because I watched Rabbids, I downloaded it onto my computer, and then I was at the repair shop with my vehicle getting some work done for a couple hours, and I had the media player on one side of my screen and my notes, my Word doc on the right side, and I was typing up every line of dialogue and everything as I was watching Rabbids, and I was sitting purposefully in a way so that if other people sat nearby, they would not see my screen from my laptop, because I did not want people seeing Rabbids out of context and just confused of what I'm watching.
How dare you? Someone could have seen that and experienced it, and you could have had a connection happen inside
I don't
that
know
D&D.
if there's a connection. It looks like almost nothing's happening for 40 minutes without dialogue.
And
you have
if
no
there was
audio of it. I had headphones
And then
on.
if that's the case, then why hide it?
Yeah. Another question that kind of popped into my mind as you were talking, though. If Rabbids had been just kind of lumped in with our episode on the short films, right? If you just view it as a 40-minute short film, how much do you like this in regards to other short films? Like thinking of The Grandmother, thinking of The Frenchman and the Cowboy, thinking of What Did Jack Do? Where does it stack in the grand scheme of short films for
I
Lynch?
think inside the mid-end, but that's just because when it comes towards a lot of these short films, there's a lot of experimentation and points of it that I'm able to sort of probably grasp on a little bit easier in general. That is independent of its own work rather than, again, me being crazy like Twin Peaks. That I think that it gives me more of a soft spot for say, for example, the ever frustrating Cowboy.
Frenchman and the Cowboy, yeah. And then my last wonderful and strange question of the week, Professor. How have both Dumbland and Rabbids shaped your understanding of David Lynch as an artist?
Rabbids has shown me that overall,
he has no regard for his neighbors.
No regard for his neighbors. That's what I discovered in the pod today. But in general, the usage of themes, if you will, brought on by David Lynch in an overall experimental work is something that still can be nice enough that I'm not as discouraged as I was in the middle of our movie, early mid section of our podcast where I started being concerned on what he was putting forward. I think that genuinely it's something that is paced well. I think that it's overall something very enticing and interesting, and something that, as we discussed in the pod today, could be transformed into something especially delectable in the current analog horror market. As far as Dumbland is concerned, I am proud that David Lynch was able to move himself forward and take on a new skill set and develop these items for himself. I am hoping one day I will stop hearing the sounds in my head.
My teeth are bleeding. My teeth are bleeding.
Oh, no.
My teeth are bleeding. My teeth are bleeding.
Stop.
My teeth are bleeding. My teeth are bleeding.
Help.
My teeth are bleeding. My teeth are bleeding.